Charlotte Hale had $3, a carpet bag, and nowhere left to run when she stumbled onto the Broken Spur Ranch that sweltering August afternoon. She'd rehearsed her plea 100 times on the Stagecoach West. A job, anything honest. But when the tall cowboy with eyes like flint looked her over and said, "Only if you'll marry me by sunset," she realized the West wasn't salvation. It was a gamble, and the sun was already sinking fast toward the Arizona horizon. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment which city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The dust had barely settled from the stagecoach wheels when Charlotte Hale understood she'd made a terrible mistake. Phoenix wasn't the glittering frontier town the recruiting pamphlets had promised. It was a collection of sun-baked buildings squatting in the desert like tombstones, streets churned to powder by wagon wheels and horse hooves, and everywhere, the suffocating heat that made her Philadelphia corset feel like an iron maiden. She stood on the wooden sidewalk outside the stage depot, carpet bag clutched in both hands, watching the coach that had carried her 2,000 miles disappear in a cloud of ochre dust. Gone. Everything was gone now. Charlotte closed her eyes against the glare and the memory that came with it. Her father's study, the mahogany desk where he'd shot himself, the letter from his business partner revealing the embezzlement that had destroyed the Hale family name. The funeral had been small. The creditors had been ruthless. And Richard Pemberton, her fiancé of 2 years, had sent his regrets via his mother's parlor maid. "We simply cannot associate with scandal, Miss Hale. Surely you understand." She'd understood perfectly. She'd understood that Philadelphia society would rather see her starve in the gutter than soil their gloves helping a fallen woman. So she'd sold everything that wasn't already seized. Her mother's cameo, her grandmother's silver, even her engagement ring, and bought a ticket west with the vague plan of finding work as a teacher or governess. But Phoenix had 3 schools, and all 3 had turned her away that morning. No references, no family, no connections. Just a desperate woman with good penmanship and a story that smelled like trouble. Charlotte opened her eyes and counted the coins in her purse for the 3rd time that hour. $3.47. The boarding house wanted 50 cents a night. Food would cost another $1 a day at least. By her calculation, she had perhaps a week before she'd be sleeping in the street. Think, Charlotte. Think. The newspaper office had no openings. The general store wasn't hiring. The hotel needed chambermaids, but the manager had looked her up and down with eyes that lingered too long on her waist, and she'd walked out before he finished his proposition. She had 6 days of money left, and she was beginning to understand why desperate women made desperate choices. It was the woman at the boarding house, Mrs. Kowalski, a broad-shouldered Polish immigrant with kind eyes, who'd suggested the ranches. "Lots of men out there need help," she'd said, folding Charlotte's good dress with practiced hands. "Cooking, cleaning, bookkeeping sometimes. You got schooling, yeah? Maybe someone needs that. How far are the ranches?" "Some close, some far. Broken Spur's maybe 8 miles north. Widow Henley's place is closer, but I heard she already got 2 girls working." Mrs. Kowalski had paused, studying Charlotte's face. "You running from something, honey? Isn't everyone out here?" The older woman had smiled sadly. "I suppose that's true enough. You want to borrow my husband's map? Roads ain't great, but you can ride, can't you?" Charlotte couldn't ride. She'd never been on a horse in her life, but she'd nodded anyway, because what else could she do? The livery stable charged 50 cents to rent a docile mare for the day, plus another 20 cents deposit. Charlotte handed over the coins and let the stable boy help her into the saddle, praying she wouldn't fall off and break her neck before she found employment. The mare, a patient gray animal named Buttercup, seemed to sense her rider's incompetence and moved with careful deliberation through the outskirts of town and onto the dusty road heading north. The landscape was unlike anything Charlotte had ever seen. Endless stretches of sand and scrub, broken by bizarre cacti that reached toward the cloudless sky like the arms of drowning men. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and hazy in the heat shimmer. Hawks circled overhead, riding thermals she couldn't feel. The sun hammered down with physical force, and within 20 minutes her blouse was soaked through with sweat. She passed 2 ranches on the way. The first, Widow Henley's, was indeed fully staffed, according to the suspicious foreman who met her at the gate. The second didn't even let her dismount before shouting that they needed ranch hands, not city girls playing dress-up. By the time Charlotte spotted the wooden sign reading Broken Spur Ranch dangling from a weathered post, she was sunburned, thirsty, and fighting tears of exhaustion. The road curved past a grove of cottonwood trees, and suddenly there it was, a sprawling collection of buildings arranged around a central yard. The main house was adobe and timber, 2 stories with a wraparound porch. Behind it stood a large barn, several outbuildings, corrals with horses, and in the distance she could see cattle grazing on brown grass. Charlotte urged Buttercup forward, her heart hammering. This was her 5th attempt. She had to make this work. 3 men were working in the yard, 2 mending a fence, 1 carrying water buckets toward the barn. They all stopped to stare as she approached. Charlotte straightened her spine and tried to look competent rather than desperate, which was difficult when your hair had escaped its pins and your dress looked like you'd worn it through a sandstorm. "Help you, miss?" The man with the water buckets set them down, wiping his hands on his pants. He was young, maybe 20, with sun-weathered skin and curious eyes. "I'm looking for the owner," Charlotte said, pleased that her voice didn't shake. "I'm seeking employment." The 2 men by the fence exchanged glances. The young man grinned. "Employment doing what, exactly?" "Whatever needs doing. I can read, write, and cipher. I managed my father's household accounts for 3 years. I can cook." That was an exaggeration, but she could learn. "And I'm a quick study at anything else." "We got a cook," one of the fence menders called out. "And the boss does his own books." Charlotte's hope flickered and dimmed. "Is there nothing? I'm willing to work for room and board, at least at first." "Tommy, who's this?" The voice came from behind her, and Charlotte turned in the saddle. Her breath caught. The man walking toward them from the barn was tall, over 6 feet, with the kind of build that came from hard physical labor rather than gymnasium training. He wore dusty work clothes, a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms marked with old scars. His hair was black, a bit too long, and his face was all hard angles, sharp jaw, straight nose, lips pressed in a neutral line that suggested smiling wasn't a frequent occurrence. But it was his eyes that stopped her, gray, like storm clouds, and utterly unreadable. "She's asking about work, boss," Tommy said. "I was just telling her we're all set." The man, the boss, apparently, looked up at Charlotte with those slate-gray eyes, and she felt examined in a way that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with assessment. He was evaluating her the way one might evaluate a horse at auction, checking for flaws, calculating value, determining if the investment would be worth the cost. "I can pay my own way," Charlotte said quickly. "I'm not looking for charity. I have skills that could be useful to a ranch operation, correspondence, contracts, inventory management. You ever worked a ranch before?" His voice was low, rough-edged. "No, but ever lived outside a city?" "No, but I'm adaptable." "Can you handle a rifle, brand cattle, ride hard for 10 hours straight?" "I can learn." "No." He turned away, dismissing her as easily as swatting a fly. Panic flared in Charlotte's chest. She slid off the horse, nearly fell, actually, her legs cramping from the unaccustomed ride, and hurried after him. "Wait, please, Mr. Blackthorne. Mr. Blackthorne, please. I've come from Philadelphia. My father died, and I have no family, no prospects. I'm educated, I'm honest, and I'm desperate enough to ride 8 miles into the desert on a borrowed horse to ask a stranger for work. That should count for something." He stopped walking, didn't turn around, but stopped. The other men in the yard had gone silent, watching. Charlotte pressed her advantage. "I'll work harder than anyone you have. I'll do whatever you ask. I just need a chance. One chance." Blackthorne stood motionless for a long moment, his back to her, and Charlotte held her breath. Then, slowly, he turned. Those gray eyes studied her again, but this time there was something different in them. Not pity. She didn't think this man had much pity in him, but perhaps calculation. "You desperate enough to do anything?" he asked quietly. "Yes." "Anything at all?" Something in his tone made her hesitate, but she'd come too far to retreat now. "Within reason." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "There's a problem, Miss Hale. Charlotte Hale." There's a problem, Miss Hale. I'm trying to secure a homestead claim on the land north of here, 160 acres with water rights. Good land. But there's a complication. He paused, those eyes never leaving hers. The Homestead Act gives preference to married couples, and there's another man, Harlan Crane, who's been trying to grab that same parcel for months. I file my claim next week. If I'm married, I move to the front of the list. If I'm single, Crane's attorneys will delay and obstruct until he finds a way to steal it out from under me. Charlotte's stomach tightened. I don't understand what this has to do with... I need a wife, Miss Hale, by next Friday. That gives me 8 days. The world seemed to tilt sideways. You're proposing marriage to me, a complete stranger. A business arrangement, Blackthorne corrected. You need work and a place to stay. I need a legal spouse to secure my land claim. We marry, I file the paperwork, and you have employment for as long as you want it. Room, board, fair wages. When the claim is approved, or if you decide to leave, I'll arrange for a divorce or annulment. No harm, no scandal. You'll have references and enough money to start fresh wherever you choose. Charlotte stared at him, certain she'd misheard. You want me to marry you for a land claim? I want to offer you a contract. Marriage is just the legal framework. He crossed his arms, waiting. But I need an answer by sunset. If you say no, I'll ride into Phoenix tonight and find someone else. If you say yes, we go to the courthouse tomorrow and make it official. That's insane. That's the West, Miss Hale. People do what they must to survive. You said you were desperate enough to do anything. I meant work. Actual employment. This is employment. You'd be managing the household, helping with the books, representing the ranch at social occasions when needed. The only difference is a piece of paper that says we're married. He glanced at the sun, sinking toward the mountains. You have until sunset. That's about 3 hours. Charlotte's mind reeled. This was madness. This was $3.47, 5 days until you're on the street. Why me? She managed. You don't know anything about me? I know you're educated. I know you're desperate enough to be honest about it. And I know you rode 8 miles alone to ask a stranger for work, which means you've got more grit than most. Blackthorne's expression didn't change. I don't need love, Miss Hale. I don't need romance. I need a legal wife who won't ask questions, won't cause trouble, and won't expect more than I'm offering. Can you be that woman? Could she? Charlotte looked at the ranch, the buildings baking in the afternoon sun, the vast empty sky that seemed to swallow everything. She thought about Philadelphia, about the shuttered house and the whispers and Richard Pemberton's cowardice. She thought about sleeping in the Phoenix streets, about what happened to women with no money and no protection. What if... She swallowed hard. What if you're cruel? What if you hurt me? For the first time, something flickered in those gray eyes, not warmth exactly, but perhaps understanding. I won't. You have my word. The word of a stranger. The word of a man who needs you as much as you need him. He gestured toward the house. Look around. Talk to my men if you want. Tommy there will tell you I'm a hard boss, but a fair one. Miguel? He nodded at one of the fence menders. Has worked here 5 years. They can tell you what kind of man I am. Then decide. It was more than she'd expected. More consideration than Richard had shown when he'd discarded her. Charlotte walked over to where Tommy stood watching the exchange with obvious fascination. Is he telling the truth? She asked quietly. About being fair? Tommy shrugged. Boss is tough, but he's square. Pays on time, doesn't cheat. Lost his temper once when I left a gate open and the horses got out, but he didn't hit me or nothing. Just made me fix it and told me to be smarter. Has he ever hurt anyone? Women? Nah. Tommy shook his head emphatically. Boss don't even go to the saloons in town. He works, he sleeps, he works some more. Married to this place, we always said. He grinned. Guess he's about to change that. Charlotte walked to the other men, asked similar questions, got similar answers. Wade Blackthorne was hard, demanding, sometimes short-tempered, but honest. He expected a full day's work, but paid fair wages. He'd once ridden through a storm to fetch a doctor for Miguel's sick child. He was, by all accounts, exactly what he claimed. A man trying to build something in an unforgiving land. She returned to where Blackthorne waited, patient as stone. The sun had dropped noticeably, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. She had maybe 2 hours. "If I say yes," Charlotte said slowly, "what exactly would be expected of me? Beyond the legal arrangement? Manage the house. We have a cook, Maria, but she needs supervision, help with the books when I ask. Host dinner if I have business associates visiting. Appear at my side for social occasions related to the homestead claim." He paused. "You'd have your own room. This would be a marriage of convenience, Miss Hale, not anything else." The relief that washed through her was profound. "And after, when the claim is settled, you're free to leave with references and 6 months' wages, or stay on as an employee if you prefer. Your choice." It was insane. Absolutely insane. Charlotte had been raised to believe marriage was sacred, that it meant love and partnership and building a life together. This was none of those things. This was a contract, pure and simple, a business transaction dressed up in legal vows. But it was also survival. "I need a guarantee," she said. "Something in writing. A contract separate from the marriage certificate that outlines the terms we've discussed." Blackthorn's eyebrow rose fractionally. Apparently she'd surprised him. "Agreed. We'll draw one up tonight. And if you break the terms, if you try to force, I won't." His voice was flat, final. "But if it makes you feel safer, the contract can include a penalty clause. If I violate the agreement, you get half the homestead value in addition to your wages." That was more than generous, suspiciously so. "Why would you offer that?" "Because I need you to trust me enough to say yes, and I don't have time for a lengthy courtship." The ghost of dark humor crossed his face. "And because I mean what I say, Miss Hale, I don't want a real wife. I want a business partner who happens to share my last name." Charlotte looked at the sinking sun, looked at the ranch, solid and real in the golden light, looked at Wade Blackthorn, this hard-eyed stranger who was offering her something impossible: safety, employment, and a future that didn't involve selling herself piece by piece in a Phoenix boarding house. She thought about her father, about the desperate choices that had led him to put a gun to his head. About her mother, dead 5 years now, who'd always said Charlotte had her grandmother's stubbornness and her grandfather's gambler's heart. "I'm sorry, Mama, but I think the West has made a gambler of me after all." "Yes," Charlotte said. "I'll marry you." Blackthorn's expression didn't change, but something in his posture relaxed fractionally. "We'll leave for Phoenix at dawn. Courthouse opens at 8. We can be back by noon." He turned toward the house, then paused. "You'll need a proper dress, something appropriate for a wedding." "I have one. It's not fancy, but it's respectable." "Good enough." He started walking again, then stopped once more. "Miss Hale?" "Yes?" "You made the right choice." Charlotte watched him disappear into the house and tried to believe him. She'd just agreed to marry a man whose first name she'd only learned 10 minutes ago. A man who looked at her with eyes like winter sky and spoke of marriage the way other men spoke of buying livestock. But as the sun continued its descent and Tommy showed her to a small room in the ranch house where she could spend the night, Charlotte realized something strange. She wasn't afraid. Terrified of her decision, yes. Uncertain about the future, absolutely. But not afraid of Wade Blackthorn himself. There was something honest in his hardness, something trustworthy in his bluntness. He'd offered her a contract, not poetry. Terms, not promises. And somehow, that felt more real than anything Richard Pemberton had ever said with flowers and moonlight to dress his words. That evening, Charlotte sat at the kitchen table with Blackthorn and Maria, a compact Mexican woman with silver-streaked hair who'd been informed of the arrangement and taken it with remarkable calm, and ate the best meal she'd had in weeks. Afterward, Blackthorn produced paper and ink, and together they drafted the contract. He was surprisingly fair, more than fair. 6 months' wages upon dissolution, whether she stayed or left. A guarantee of separate sleeping arrangements. A penalty clause that would give her a substantial payment if he violated the physical boundaries, and a provision that allowed her to leave at any time with 1 month's notice and no penalties. "You're being very generous," Charlotte said, reading over the document. Most men would take advantage." Blackthorn signed his name with a quick slash of the pen. I'm not most men, Miss Hale, and I need you to stay long enough to make this work. She signed her own name, the ink drying like a brand. Charlotte Hale. Soon to be Charlotte Blackthorn. The absurdity of it hit her again, and she had to suppress a slightly hysterical laugh. Something funny? Blackthorn asked. Just thinking that 24 hours ago, I was on a stagecoach practicing how to ask for a job as a schoolteacher. Now I'm signing a marriage contract with a rancher I met this afternoon. It's not exactly how I imagined my life would go. How did you imagine it? Charlotte considered the question. Honestly, I stopped imagining much of anything after my father died. The future became something to survive rather than plan for. Blackthorn was quiet for a moment. Then, the future's what you make of it out here. No one cares who you were back east, only who you are now. And who am I now? Those gray eyes met hers. Someone who said yes when most people would have run. Someone brave enough to gamble on a stranger. He folded the contract and handed her a copy. Get some rest, Miss Hale. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Charlotte took the paper and retreated to the small room Maria had prepared. It was simple, a bed, a washstand, a wooden chair, but clean and cool in the evening air. She lay awake long into the night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. Horses moving in the corrals, an owl hunting, the creak of settling wood. Tomorrow she would marry Wade Blackthorn. Tomorrow she would become someone's wife, even if only on paper. Tomorrow her life would change in ways she couldn't predict. But tonight, for the first time since her father's death, Charlotte Hale felt something other than despair. She felt possibility. Dangerous, uncertain, terrifying possibility. The sun rose fierce and golden over the Arizona desert, and Charlotte woke to Maria's soft knock on her door. She dressed in her good gray dress, the one she'd worn to her father's funeral, though she tried not to think about that, and pinned her hair with trembling fingers. In the mirror, her own face looked back at her, pale from weeks of grief, uncertain but determined. You can do this. You've survived worse. The ride to Phoenix took 3 hours. Blackthorn drove the wagon in silence, and Charlotte didn't try to fill it. She was too busy trying to calm her racing heart. When they arrived at the courthouse, he helped her down with a brief, impersonal touch, and they walked inside together. The ceremony, if you could call it that, took less than 10 minutes. A board clerk read the required words. Blackthorn answered, "I do," in a flat voice. Charlotte's own voice shook only slightly when she made the same vow. There were no flowers, no music, no guests, just two strangers binding their lives together in a transaction witnessed by a clerk who'd clearly seen stranger things. "You may kiss the bride," the clerk said, already reaching for the next form in his stack. Charlotte's heart jumped. She'd forgotten about that part. She looked up at Blackthorn, who was studying her with that same unreadable expression. Then he leaned down, and his lips brushed hers so briefly she almost wondered if she'd imagined it. It wasn't a kiss so much as a formality. Cool, quick, contractual. "Congratulations," the clerk said without enthusiasm, handing them the marriage certificate. "Next." And just like that, Charlotte Hale became Charlotte Blackthorn. They walked out into the bright Phoenix morning as husband and wife, and Charlotte felt strangely numb. Blackthorn helped her back into the wagon, and they began the long drive back to the Broken Spur Ranch. "You all right?" he asked after about an hour of silence. "I'm not sure," Charlotte admitted. "It feels like something that happened to someone else." "Give it time. Sinks in eventually." She glanced at him. "Does this feel strange to you?" "I needed a wife. Now I have one. Feels practical." But there was something in his voice, the slightest tension, that suggested he wasn't quite as unaffected as he pretended. They arrived back at the ranch just after noon. The men working in the yard congratulated them with varying degrees of sincerity and amusement. Maria had prepared a surprisingly nice lunch, and they ate in the same silence that had characterized the ride. That evening, Blackthorn showed Charlotte to a different room, larger than the one she'd used the night before, with a window overlooking the desert and a lock on the inside of the door. "Your room," he said. "Mine's at the other end of the hall. Maria's is downstairs. You need anything? Just ask." "Mr. Blackthorn." "Wade," he corrected. "We're married now. Might as well use first names. Wade, Charlotte tried the name, felt it strange on her tongue. Thank you for keeping your word. He looked at her for a long moment, and she thought she saw something flicker in those gray eyes. Loneliness, perhaps, or just exhaustion. Get some rest, Charlotte. Tomorrow you can start learning how the ranch works. Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Charlotte closed the door, turned the lock, and sat on the bed. She was married. She was married to a man she barely knew, in a place she didn't understand, with a future she couldn't predict. But she was safe. She was employed. She had a roof over her head and a contract that protected her. Charlotte lay back on the bed and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she would begin learning to be Charlotte Blackthorne, ranch wife. Tomorrow, she would start this strange new life. Tonight, she would simply survive the knowledge that she'd just gambled everything on a man with storm cloud eyes and a heart she couldn't read. The sun set over the Broken Spur Ranch, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, and Charlotte fell asleep to the sound of coyotes singing in the distance, wondering what she'd truly married into, and whether Wade Blackthorne's word would prove as solid as the Arizona bedrock or as shifting as desert sand. Charlotte woke to darkness and the sound of someone moving in the house below. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was, then it all came rushing back. The ranch. The wedding. Wade Blackthorne, her husband in name only, somewhere in this unfamiliar house. She lay still, listening. Footsteps crossed the floor downstairs, then the creak of the front door opening and closing. Through her window, she could see the faint gray light of pre-dawn. Someone was starting their day, and Charlotte realized with a jolt that she should probably be doing the same. She dressed quickly in the dim light, choosing the plainest of her 3 dresses, a brown calico that had seen better days but would serve for work. Her hands shook slightly as she pinned her hair, and she paused to study her reflection in the small mirror. The same face as yesterday, but somehow different. Married. She was a married woman now, though she'd spent her wedding night alone, listening to the house settle around her like the bones of some sleeping creature. The kitchen was empty when she arrived, but a fire already burned in the stove and the smell of coffee filled the air. Charlotte poured herself a cup, grateful for something to do with her hands, and was taking her first sip when Maria bustled in through the back door carrying a basket of eggs. "Ah, you're awake. Good." The older woman set the basket on the counter and began pulling out pans. "Wade left an hour ago. He and the men are moving cattle to the north pasture. Won't be back until tonight." Charlotte felt an unexpected mixture of relief and disappointment. "Should I have been up earlier to make breakfast?" Maria laughed, a warm sound that eased some of Charlotte's tension. "Mija, the men eat before dawn. Wade would have been gone before you even opened your eyes. Besides, that's my job. Yours is to learn how this place works so you can manage it proper." "Manage it? But I don't know anything about ranching." "Not ranching, the house, the books, the business side." Maria cracked eggs into a bowl with practiced efficiency. "Wade's good with cattle and horses, but he's drowning in paperwork. Bills, contracts, correspondence. He hates all of it. That's where you come in." She paused, giving Charlotte a shrewd look. "You can read and write, yes? Do numbers?" "Yes, I managed my father's accounts for years." "Then you'll be fine. After breakfast, I'll show you where Wade keeps everything. Fair warning, it's a mess." Maria hadn't been exaggerating. After a breakfast of eggs, beans, and fresh tortillas that made Charlotte's sad Philadelphia cooking look even more pathetic in comparison, the older woman led her to a small room off the main hall that Wade apparently used as an office. Papers covered every surface. The desk, the chairs, even stacked on the floor. Ledgers lay open with entries trailing off mid-page. Unopened letters were piled in a crate that had once held ammunition. "Dios mío," Charlotte breathed. "How does he find anything?" "He doesn't. That's the problem." Maria picked up a stack of papers and fanned through them. Bills from 6 months ago, a letter from the land office, something about a feed order, it's all mixed together. Charlotte felt a familiar itch in her fingers, the same one she'd felt when first confronting her father's disorganized study. Chaos offended her. Numbers and letters deserved respect, order, logic. Where does he keep the current ledger? Under there somewhere. Maria gestured vaguely at the desk. He writes things down when he remembers, but mostly he just keeps it all in his head. That's insane. How does he track expenses, income, what he owes and what's owed to him? You'll have to ask him. I just cook and keep house. Numbers make my head hurt. Charlotte rolled up her sleeves. This, at least, was something she understood, something she could control. I'll need a clear workspace. Can you help me move some of this? They spent the morning sorting. Charlotte created piles: urgent, important, reference, and rubbish. The rubbish pile grew alarmingly large: duplicate receipts, outdated price lists, advertisements for equipment Wade had clearly never intended to buy. Beneath the chaos, she found 3 ledgers, all in Wade's cramped handwriting, with entries that jumped from January to April to November with no apparent logic. He just writes things down whenever he thinks of it, Charlotte muttered, flipping through pages. No organization, no system. How is this ranch not collapsed? Wade keeps most of it up here. Maria tapped her temple. He knows every head of cattle, every fence that needs mending, every dollar he's spent. But getting it on paper, that's another story. By noon, Charlotte had cleared the desk and arranged everything into a system that made sense. Current bills in one tray, paid receipts in another, correspondence requiring responses in a third. She'd found a clean ledger in the bottom drawer and had begun transferring Wade's scattered entries into a proper accounting system, with columns for date, description, amount, and running balance. The numbers told a story. The Broken Spur was profitable, but barely. Wade was living month to month, taking every penny of income and pouring it back into the ranch. New equipment, fence repairs, wages for the men, feed for the animals during the dry season. There was no cushion, no savings, one bad year, one disaster, and everything would collapse. And he was trying to take on a homestead claim on top of this. Charlotte sat back, rubbing her eyes. The man was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish, possibly both. You look like you've seen a ghost, Maria said, appearing in the doorway with a plate of food. Eat something. You've been at this for hours. How long has Wade been running the ranch alone? 3 years, since his father died. Maria set the plate down. Before that, they ran it together. But the old man had a stroke, left Wade with everything: the ranch, the debts, the dream of that homestead. What's so important about the homestead land? Maria's expression grew distant. Water. There's a creek runs through it year-round, never dries up, even in drought. With that water, Wade could expand the herd, grow feed, maybe even plant some crops. Without it, she shrugged. He'll survive, but he'll never do more than survive. Charlotte looked down at the ledger, at the careful way Wade tracked every penny. And this Harlan Crane wants the same land? Crane wants everything. He's got the biggest spread in the territory, but it's never enough. He sees that homestead water, and he sees a way to control more land, push out the smaller ranchers. Maria's voice hardened. He's been after the Broken Spur for years, made Wade's father a dozen offers, each one lower than the last. When the old man refused, strange things started happening. Fences cut, cattle scattered, a fire that nearly took the barn. Did they report it to the law? Sheriff Dalton tried, but there was never proof. Crane's too smart to get his own hands dirty. He has men who do that for him. Maria moved toward the door, then paused. That's why Wade needed a wife so fast, mija. Crane's already filed for that homestead. If Wade doesn't file as a married man, Crane's attorneys will tie everything up in court until the land goes to whoever has deeper pockets, and that ain't Wade. After Maria left, Charlotte sat in the quiet office, looking at the stacks of now organized papers. She'd agreed to this arrangement for survival, for employment, for a roof over her head. But she was beginning to understand that Wade hadn't just bought himself a legal wife. He'd gambled everything on a stranger's ability to help him save not just the land, but his entire future. The weight of that responsibility settled over her like a physical thing. That evening, Charlotte was transferring the last of the disorganized entries into the new ledger when she heard horses in the yard. Voices, low and tired, the sound of men who'd worked hard all day in the brutal sun. She resisted the urge to go to the window, keeping her eyes on the numbers instead. 15 minutes later, Wade appeared in the office doorway. He looked exhausted. Dust coated every inch of him. His shirt was dark with sweat, and there was a streak of something, mud or possibly blood, across his jaw. but those gray eyes were alert as they swept over the transformed room. "What did you do?" he asked. Charlotte set down her pen. "Organized. Everything's sorted by type and date. Bills that need paying are in the red tray. Correspondence requiring responses in the blue. I started a new ledger with proper columns and transferred your entries from the last year. You had things written on scraps of paper, backs of envelopes. I put it all in one place." Wade stepped into the room, picking up the current ledger and flipping through it. His eyebrows rose fractionally. "This is detailed." "That's how accounting works. You need to be able to track everything or you won't know where you stand." Charlotte hesitated. "I hope I didn't overstep. You did say I was to help with the books." "No, this is—" He set the ledger down carefully, as if it might break. "This is good. Better than good. I can actually read it." "Your handwriting isn't bad," Charlotte offered diplomatically. The corner of his mouth twitched. That almost smile again. "You mean when I bother to write things down at all?" "Maria said you keep most of it in your head." "Worked for my father. He never wrote down much either." "With respect, that's a terrible system. What if something happened to you? No one would know what the ranch owes or is owed. The whole operation would fall apart." Charlotte caught herself. "I'm sorry, that was presumptuous." "It was honest." Wade pulled off his gloves, studying her with that measuring look. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone more fragile, I suppose. Someone who'd fall apart at a little hard work." He gestured at the organized office. "This took all day, didn't it?" "Most of it, but I enjoyed it. Numbers make sense to me. They follow rules. Unlike people." Charlotte met his eyes. Unlike people. Something passed between them in that moment. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of recognition. They were both people who preferred order to chaos, logic to emotion, contracts to promises. In some strange way, they understood each other. "I'm going to clean up," Wade said finally. "We eat at 6. After dinner, I'll show you the correspondence that needs responses. Some of it's related to the homestead filing." "All right." He started to leave, then turned back. "Charlotte, thank you for this." He indicated the office with a small gesture. "It helps." Then he was gone, his boots echoing on the wooden floors. Charlotte sat alone in the orderly office and felt something shift inside her chest. It wasn't attraction, she barely knew the man. But it was something. Respect, perhaps. Or the beginning of partnership. She'd married him for survival, but maybe, just maybe, she could actually help him with this impossible dream of his. Dinner was a more social affair than Charlotte had expected. Wade's ranch hands, Tommy, Miguel, and 3 others whose names she struggled to remember, ate at a long table in the kitchen, trading stories and jokes while Maria kept everyone's plates full. Charlotte sat at Wade's right hand, feeling awkward and out of place, but no one seemed to expect her to contribute much. They were curious, asking polite questions about Philadelphia and her journey west, but accepting her vague answers without pressing. "Boss says you're a genius with numbers," Tommy said through a mouthful of beef. "Made his office look like something civilized people might use." "I just organized what was already there," Charlotte demurred. "Yeah, but he's been saying he'd organize it for 2 years. Miguel grinned. "We figured he'd die of old age before it happened." Wade gave him a flat look. "I've been busy keeping this ranch running. Some of us don't have time to worry about whether bills are stacked pretty." "No, you just lose them under piles of other bills," one of the other men, Jake, Charlotte thought, said with a laugh. "Remember when you paid Wilson twice because you couldn't find the first receipt?" "That was one time." "Twice," Miguel corrected. "You did it with the feed store, too." Charlotte hid a smile behind her coffee cup as Wade's jaw tightened. He didn't like being teased, but he tolerated it from his men with the air of someone who'd learned that some battles weren't worth fighting. After dinner, the hands dispersed to the bunkhouse while Charlotte helped Maria with the dishes despite the older woman's protests. Then Wade led her back to the office, now lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on the walls. He pulled out a folder of letters. "These are from the land office. They want documentation of our situation." "Documentation?" "Proof of marriage, proof that we're establishing a household on the claim. They want to see that we're serious, not just paper filing to beat the system. Charlotte took the letters, reading through them carefully. The bureaucratic language was dense, but the message was clear. The land office had received multiple claims for the same parcel, and they intended to investigate each one thoroughly before making a decision. They would be sending an inspector within the next few months. An inspector, Charlotte said slowly, to verify that we're actually married? To verify that we're actually living as married homesteaders. That means they'll want to see us both at the property, see evidence of improvement, a cabin, cleared land, crops or livestock. Wade leaned against the desk, arms crossed. I've been working on a cabin site up there for the last month. Basic structure's up, but it needs finishing. I was planning to move us up there once the claim's approved, but now, he trailed off. Now we might need to move up there before it's approved, Charlotte finished, to prove we're serious. Exactly. Charlotte set down the letters. How long would we need to stay there? Depends on when the inspector comes. Could be a month, could be 3. And the ranch? Who would manage it? Miguel can handle the day-to-day. He's been here long enough to know how things work. I'd ride down every few days to check on things. Wade's eyes searched her face. I know this isn't what we discussed. If you're not comfortable, a cabin in the wilderness is still better than the Philadelphia streets, Charlotte said. But I'll need time to get the accounts fully in order before we go. And we'll need to maintain correspondence with anyone important. I can't let bills go unpaid or contracts expire just because we're not physically here. Wade's expression shifted. Surprise, perhaps, or approval. You're taking this seriously. You married me to help you secure this land. I intend to hold up my end of the arrangement. Charlotte met his eyes. Besides, if we're going to convince an inspector that we're a legitimate household, we'll need to appear convincing. That means knowing each other better than we do now. Knowing each other, Wade repeated slowly. Basic information, where I'm from, where you're from, how we supposedly met, our interests, our habits. If an inspector asks us questions separately and our answers don't match, he'll suspect fraud. Wade was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down, gesturing for her to do the same. All right, what do you need to know? Charlotte retrieved a blank sheet of paper and her pen. Everything. Start with your family. You said your father ran this ranch? Ran it until he died 3 years ago. Stroke took him fast. He was gone within a day. Wade's voice was matter of fact, but Charlotte heard the grief beneath it. My mother died when I was 12. Fever. After that, it was just me and Pa building this place up from nothing. No siblings? Had a younger sister, Sarah. She died the same year as Ma. Same fever. Charlotte's pen paused on the paper. I'm sorry. Wade shrugged, but his shoulders were tight. Long time ago. It doesn't stop hurting just because time passes, Charlotte said quietly. My mother died 5 years ago. I still catch myself wanting to tell her things. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the walls came down. Two people who'd lost too much, too young, finding unexpected common ground in a lamplight office. Wade cleared his throat. What else do you need? They spent the next hour trading information like merchants negotiating a deal. Charlotte learned that Wade was 31, that he'd never been married before, that he'd once spent 6 months in Montana learning about cattle breeds from a rancher his father knew. He could play the harmonica badly, hated beans, and had a scar on his left shoulder from a horse that had thrown him into a fence post when he was 16. In return, she told him about Philadelphia, about her father's accounting firm, about the scandal that had destroyed everything. She didn't mention Richard Pemberton. That humiliation still stung too much. But she told him about her mother's garden, her childhood love of books, her complete inability to carry a tune. Can't sing at all? Wade asked, something almost like amusement in his voice. I sound like a cat being strangled. My mother used to beg me to mouth the words in church rather than actually participate. That earned her a real smile. Small, brief, but genuine. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger. Charlotte felt her breath catch slightly and looked away, confused by her own reaction. We should have a story, she said, refocusing on the paper. About how we met. Something believable. Wade considered. You came looking for work. I offered you a position. We spent time together, realized we had common interests, decided to marry. It's mostly true, except for the part where we fell in love. Do we need that part? Charlotte tapped her pen against the paper. Most people marry for love. If we claim a purely practical arrangement, it might raise suspicions. So we lie. We embellish, Charlotte corrected. We say that we found companionship despite our initial practical arrangement, that we discovered we suited each other. That's not entirely false. Wade's gray eyes fixed on her. We've been married one day, Charlotte. How do you know if we suit each other? I know you keep your word. I know you're working yourself to exhaustion trying to save this ranch. I know you could have taken advantage of my situation, but you didn't. She set down the pen. That's enough to believe we might suit each other, given time. He was quiet for so long that Charlotte began to worry she'd overstepped. Then he said, I know you're braver than you think you are. I know you're smart enough to turn chaos into order in a single day. And I know you're honest, even when the truth isn't comfortable. He stood, moving toward the door. That's enough for me, too. Charlotte sat alone in the office after he left, staring at the notes they'd made. On paper, they were beginning to look like a real couple, two people with histories and interests and reasons to have found each other. But paper was easy. Living it would be harder. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Charlotte rose early, helped Maria with breakfast for the hands, then spent her mornings wrestling the ranch's finances into submission. The picture they revealed was sobering. Wade was deeply in debt, not dangerously so, but enough that one bad season could tip everything into crisis. He owed money to the feed store, the equipment supplier, and the bank in Phoenix. The mortgage on the ranch property itself was current, but barely. How does he manage it? Charlotte asked Maria one afternoon. The numbers are so tight. He doesn't buy anything for himself. Look around. When's the last time you saw him in a new shirt? New boots? He wears everything until it falls apart. Maria was kneading dough, her hands working with practiced rhythm. Food, wages, equipment, livestock, that's where every penny goes. He hasn't taken a day off in 3 years. Charlotte thought about the man she saw only at meals and occasionally in the evenings when they reviewed correspondence together. Wade worked from before dawn until after dark, coming back to the house exhausted and covered in dust. He ate quickly, spoke little, and disappeared to his own room as soon as business was concluded. She'd heard him moving around late at night, footsteps crossing and recrossing the floor above her head, and wondered if he slept at all. A week after their wedding, Charlotte was in the office when she heard raised voices in the yard. She looked up from the ledger to see a group of men on horseback approaching the house. Wade and his hands had been working on the south fence, but they were walking quickly toward the newcomers, and Charlotte could see tension in every line of Wade's body. She moved to the window for a better view. The lead rider was an older man, maybe 50, dressed in expensive clothes too fine for ranch work. His horse was a beautiful palomino, its tack gleaming with silver. The 3 men flanking him looked less like cowboys and more like hired guns, hard faces, rifles prominently displayed in saddle scabbards. That's Crane, Maria said quietly, appearing beside Charlotte. Harlan Crane. Charlotte watched as Wade stopped about 10 feet from the group, his hands loose at his sides. Even from a distance, she could see the deliberate control in his posture. Miguel and Tommy flanked him, equally tense. I should go out there, Charlotte said. No, let Wade handle it. But I'm his wife now. Isn't that the whole point? Maria gave her a sharp look. The point is to file papers, not to put yourself in front of Crane. That man's dangerous, mija. Stay inside. But Charlotte was already moving toward the door. She'd spent 25 years being the proper Philadelphia lady, staying inside while men handled business. That life was over. If she was going to be Wade Blackthorn's wife, even a paper wife, she needed to act like it. She stepped onto the porch just as Crane was speaking. Just being neighborly, Wade. Heard you went and got yourself married. Wanted to offer my congratulations. The older man's voice was smooth, cultured, with an undercurrent of mockery. Appreciate it, Wade said flatly. Now you can head back to your place and let me get back to work. Now, is that any way to treat a neighbor who rode all this way? Especially when I've got a proposition that might interest you. Not interested in anything you're selling, Crane. Crane's eyes drifted past Wade to where Charlotte stood on the porch. His smile widened. This the new bride? My. She's a pretty thing. Where'd you find her, Wade? Mail order? Charlotte saw Wade's hands curl into fists. She walked forward before he could respond, descending the porch steps and crossing the yard with her head high and her spine straight. This was the walk she'd learned from her mother, the one that said she belonged to Philadelphia society and you did not, the one that had cowed shopkeepers and social climbers back east. "Mrs. Blackthorne," she said, extending her hand to Crane as if they were meeting at a garden party rather than a dusty ranch yard. "How kind of you to welcome me to the territory." Crane leaned down from his saddle to take her hand, his smile turning calculating. "The pleasure's mine, ma'am. Harlan Crane, at your service. I own the Triple C, largest spread in 3 counties. "How impressive," Charlotte said with perfect politeness and no warmth whatsoever. "Though size isn't everything, is it? I found that well-managed operations of any size can be remarkably successful." The smile froze on Crane's face. Beside her, Charlotte heard Tommy suppress a snort of laughter. Quite right, Crane said after a moment. "And how are you finding ranch life, Mrs. Blackthorne? Must be quite different from wherever you came from." "Philadelphia. And yes, it's different. But I'm finding the change refreshing. There's an honesty to the West that I appreciate." She let the implication hang in the air. Crane's eyes narrowed fractionally. "Honesty? Yes. Speaking of which, I was just about to make your husband an offer on that parcel he's been eyeing, the old homestead land up north. Save him the trouble of all that bureaucratic filing, share some of the water rights, make it worth his while." "How generous," Charlotte said. "But I'm afraid that land is rather important to our plans. We're looking forward to building our future there." "Your future?" Crane's gaze moved between her and Wade. "Interesting timing, your marriage, right when that land came up for claim." "I'd call it fortuitous rather than interesting," Charlotte replied coolly, "though I suppose cynics might see conspiracy in every coincidence." The air grew thick with tension. One of Crane's men shifted in his saddle, hand moving subtly toward his rifle. Wade stepped closer to Charlotte, and she felt rather than saw his protective instinct kick in. "We've got work to do, Crane," Wade said quietly. "Time for you to leave. I'm making a legitimate offer, and I'm giving you a legitimate answer. No. Now get off my land." Crane's mask of civility cracked. "You're making a mistake, Blackthorne. That homestead should be mine, and you know it. Your father knew it too. That's why he never could make the claim stick." "My father's dead. I'm not." "Not yet," Crane said softly. "But the territory's dangerous. Accidents happen, especially to people who overreach." His eyes slid to Charlotte. "To people who have vulnerabilities." Wade's hand shot out and grabbed Crane's reins, pulling the Palomino's head down hard. "That sounded like a threat. You want to be clear about it?" "Just stating facts. A man with a brand new wife to protect might want to be more cautious about his ambitions." Crane jerked his horse's head free. "Think about it, Wade. My offer stands for another week. After that, you'll wish you'd taken it." He wheeled his horse around, his men following, and they thundered out of the yard in a cloud of dust. Charlotte stood frozen, her heart pounding, as Wade watched them disappear down the road. "That was stupid," he said finally, not looking at her. "Excuse me?" "Coming out here, talking to him. That was stupid and dangerous." Charlotte's temper flared. "I'm your wife. Was I supposed to hide inside like a frightened child? You're a legal convenience, not a real wife. And Crane just got a good look at you, which means he now knows exactly how to get to me." Wade finally turned to face her, and his eyes were cold. "Next time I tell you to stay inside, you stay inside." He stalked away toward the barn, leaving Charlotte standing in the yard, shaking with anger and, though she hated to admit it, fear. Because Crane's threat had been clear, and she'd just made herself visible. She'd just made herself a target. That night, Charlotte lay awake listening to Wade's footsteps pacing overhead, back and forth, until the sky began to lighten with dawn. The silence between them stretched through breakfast the next morning, thick and uncomfortable as the humid air before a storm. Wade sat at the far end of the table, methodically working through Maria's biscuits and gravy while studiously avoiding Charlotte's gaze. She matched his silence with her own, pride keeping her spine straight and her eyes on her plate even though anger still simmered in her chest. Tommy and Miguel exchanged glances, but wisely kept their mouths shut. Even Maria seemed subdued, refilling coffee cups without her usual cheerful commentary. It was Jake who finally broke the tension, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Boss, you want us to start on the north fence line today, or—" "The cabin," Wade interrupted, his voice rough from lack of sleep. "We're moving up the timeline. I want that homestead cabin finished within 2 weeks." Miguel's eyebrows rose. 2 weeks, boss. That's 2 weeks. Whatever it takes. We work through the weekend if we have to. Oops. Wade finally looked up, his gray eyes hard. Crane made his move yesterday. He knows about the marriage now, which means he'll be looking for ways to challenge it. We need to be living on that land before the inspector comes, and we need it to look like we've been there a while. "Living up there?" Tommy asked. "You and Mrs. Blackthorne?" "That's generally how homesteading works, yeah." Charlotte set down her fork with deliberate precision. "Might I be consulted about decisions that affect my living situation?" Wade's jaw tightened. "We discussed this possibility. We discussed it as a future contingency, not as something happening in 2 weeks. Things changed yesterday. Crane made threats that you seem to think are my fault." Charlotte's voice was quiet but sharp as a blade. "Perhaps if we're going to discuss what happened yesterday, we should do it privately, rather than in front of your entire crew." The room went completely silent. Charlotte could feel 5 pairs of eyes darting between her and Wade, waiting to see who would back down. Wade stared at her for a long moment, something flickering in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or grudging respect. "Fine." He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "My office. Now." Charlotte rose with far more grace than she felt, and followed him out of the kitchen, acutely aware of the whispers that erupted the moment they were out of earshot. Wade held the office door open for her with stiff courtesy, then closed it firmly behind them. "You want to talk about yesterday?" he said, before she could speak. "Let's talk. You deliberately disobeyed. I'm not one of your ranch hands to be ordered around. You're under my protection, which means you follow my lead when there's danger. I was trying to help. We're supposed to be convincing people we're a real married couple, and real wives don't hide in the house while their husbands face threats." Charlotte felt her temper rising despite her attempts to control it. "I've spent my entire life being told to stay inside, to be quiet, to let men handle things. My father handled things right into a scandal and a bullet. Richard Pemberton handled things by abandoning me the moment I became inconvenient. Forgive me if I've grown skeptical of men's judgment." Wade's expression shifted, some of the anger bleeding away. "Who's Richard Pemberton?" Charlotte's breath caught. She hadn't meant to say that name out loud. "No one. It doesn't matter." "It clearly does matter. Who is he?" "My former fiancé." The words tasted bitter. "We were engaged for 2 years. The moment my father died and the scandal broke, Richard sent his mother's maid to return my letters and break the engagement. He couldn't even face me himself." Wade was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He sounds like a coward." "He was practical. I'd become a liability. There's a difference between practical and cowardly. Practical would have been helping you salvage what you could, standing by you. What he did was just—" Wade shook his head. "Cowardly." Something in Charlotte's chest loosened slightly. She'd expected judgment, or worse, that particular male solidarity that would defend Richard's choice. Instead, Wade had named it for what it was. "Thank you," she said quietly. "But that doesn't change what happened yesterday. I was trying to present a united front, and you made yourself a target." Wade moved to the desk, bracing his hands on it. "Crane's smart, Charlotte. He doesn't make threats he can't follow through on. He saw you, saw that I care about—" He stopped, correcting himself. "That I'm responsible for your safety. Now he knows the easiest way to hurt me is through you. You think I don't understand that? I grew up watching Philadelphia society destroy people. I know how threats work." Charlotte crossed her arms. "But I also know that showing weakness invites worse. If I'd hidden inside, Crane would have known he could intimidate us. Instead, he saw a united household. He saw a vulnerable woman who'd make an easy hostage." The bluntness of it sent a chill through her. "Is that a real possibility?" Wade met her eyes, and the honesty in his gaze was almost worse than the anger had been. I don't know. Crane's done a lot of things over the years: sabotage, intimidation, legal maneuvering, but actually hurting someone, taking them? I don't think he'd go that far, but I'm not certain. Charlotte sank into one of the chairs, suddenly exhausted. So what do we do? We move fast, get to the homestead, establish visible residency, make it harder for him to challenge the claim. And you... He hesitated, then continued more gently. You stay close. No more riding into town alone. No more confronting dangerous men in the yard. I can't live in a cage, Wade. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to be smart. He pulled out the other chair and sat down, some of the hardness leaving his posture. Look, I know this isn't what you signed up for. The contract said safe employment, and here I am telling you there's a man who might hurt you to get to me. If you want to back out, I'll understand. I can put you on a stage to California, give you enough money to start fresh somewhere Crane can't reach you. Charlotte studied his face, seeing the genuine offer behind the words. He'd give up the homestead, give up his father's dream, rather than put her in real danger. It was, she realized, possibly the most selfless thing anyone had offered her in years. No, she said. Wade blinked. No? I agreed to help you secure this land. I don't break my contracts just because they become difficult. She straightened her shoulders. Besides, you're not the only one with something to prove. Everyone back in Philadelphia wrote me off as a ruined woman, a scandal, a burden. I'd like to prove them wrong by actually building something worthwhile. A smile ghosted across Wade's face. A real one this time, not just the twitch of his lips. You're either very brave or very stubborn. Can't I be both? I suppose you can. He stood, offering his hand. Partners, then? Real partners, not just paper ones? Charlotte took his hand, feeling the calluses and strength in his grip. Partners, but that means you actually consult me before making decisions that affect us both. Fair enough. And you ask before walking into dangerous situations. I'll consider it, Charlotte said, which made Wade's smile widen slightly. I'll take what I can get. The next 2 weeks transformed into a blur of frantic activity. Wade and the men worked on the homestead cabin from dawn until dark, while Charlotte managed the ranch accounts and began preparing for the move. Maria helped her inventory what they'd need: bedding, cooking supplies, tools, food stores, and together they packed everything into crates and trunks. You'll need warmer clothes, Maria said, eyeing Charlotte's limited wardrobe. Gets cold up in the high country at night, even in summer. Charlotte looked at her 3 dresses, already worn thin from use, and tried not to feel overwhelmed. I don't have money for new clothes. Don't need new. I got some things from when I was younger, before I got so round. Maria disappeared into her room and returned with an armful of practical cotton dresses, a warm shawl, and a pair of sturdy boots. These will fit you better than those city shoes you've been wearing. Maria, I can't take your things. You're not taking, I'm giving. What am I going to do with them, They just sit in my trunk getting moth-eaten. The older woman pressed them into Charlotte's arms. Besides, you're family now. That's what family does. Family. The word hit Charlotte harder than she'd expected. She'd lost her family, her real family, and hadn't expected to find even the shadow of one in this strange arrangement. But Maria's kindness, the casual way the ranch hands had started including her in their jokes, even Wade's gruff protectiveness, it was beginning to feel like something. On the 3rd day, Wade brought her up to see the cabin. They rode together, Charlotte on gentle Buttercup, Wade on his big sorrel gelding, following a narrow trail that climbed into the hills north of the ranch. The landscape changed as they ascended, the scrubby desert giving way to stands of pine and juniper. The air grew cooler, sweeter, and Charlotte could hear water running somewhere nearby. That's North Creek, Wade said, pointing toward the sound. Runs year-round, never freezes completely even in winter. That's the whole reason this land's valuable. They emerged into a clearing, and Charlotte caught her breath. The cabin stood at the edge of a meadow, backed by pine trees with the creek running along the eastern border. The structure was simple, maybe 20 feet by 20 feet, built from logs chinked with mud, but solid. A stone chimney rose from one end, and the roof looked newly shingled. Windows had been cut on 3 sides. real glass windows that must have cost Wade a fortune. "It's beautiful," Charlotte said, and meant it. Wade dismounted and helped her down, a courtesy he'd started extending without comment, then led her inside. The interior was a single large room with a sleeping loft built into the rafters. An iron stove occupied one corner, a rough table and chairs another. The floor was packed earth for now, but Wade pointed to stacks of lumber against one wall. "Planning to put in a real floor next month, and I'll build a proper bed frame. For now, it's pretty basic." Charlotte walked to the window, looking out at the meadow where wildflowers bobbed in the breeze. "It's more than basic. It's a home." "It will be. Eventually." Wade moved to stand beside her, his voice softer than usual. "My father used to bring me up here when I was a kid, before Crane's father owned all the surrounding land, before the water rights got complicated. Pa would point to this spot and say, 'Someday, son, someday, this'll be ours.' He'd be proud of you," Charlotte said, "fighting this hard to make it happen." Wade was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I hope so, though he'd probably tell me I'm doing it the hard way." "Is there an easy way?" "Probably not, but he'd say it anyway." They stood together in the quiet cabin, and Charlotte felt something shift between them. Not the wall coming down entirely, Wade Blackthorne was too guarded for that, but maybe a crack appearing, a glimpse of the man beneath the hard exterior. "We should head back," Wade said finally. "Still got work to do before sunset." But as they rode down the mountain trail, Charlotte found herself looking back at the cabin, and for the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt something almost like hope. The day before they were scheduled to move to the homestead, Wade rode into Phoenix for supplies and returned with something unexpected, a small Derringer pistol and a box of ammunition. "You need to learn to shoot," he said without preamble, setting them on the kitchen table. Charlotte stared at the gun. "I've never—" "I know, that's the problem." Wade picked up the Derringer, checking the empty chamber with practiced efficiency. "This is small enough that you can hide it in a pocket or bag. 2 shots, easy to handle. I want you carrying it whenever I'm not around." "You really think it'll come to that?" "I think hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Come on, we've got an hour before dark." He led her out past the barn to a flat area where he'd set up bottles on fence posts. For the next hour, he taught her the basics: how to load, how to aim, how to account for the kick. Charlotte's first 3 shots went wide, making Tommy and Miguel laugh from where they watched by the barn. But her 4th shot shattered a bottle, and her 5th did the same. "Natural talent," Wade said, something like approval in his voice. "Or beginner's luck." "My father took me shooting once when I was 12, Charlotte admitted, reloading carefully. "Just the once, before my mother found out and put a stop to it. But I remember liking it, the focus it required." "Well, that focus might save your life someday. Keep practicing." They spent the remaining light-breaking bottles until Charlotte's hands ached and her ears rang from the shots. But by the time darkness fell, she could hit the targets more often than not, and the weight of the Derringer in her pocket felt less foreign. That night, she found Wade on the porch, staring out at the dark desert. She'd been heading to bed, but something made her pause, then step outside to join him. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Thinking." He didn't look at her, his profile sharp in the moonlight. "About tomorrow. About all the ways this could go wrong." Charlotte leaned against the porch railing. "Second thoughts?" "Always have second thoughts. That's what keeps you alive." Wade glanced at her. "You?" "Terrified," Charlotte admitted. "But that seems to be my permanent state lately. I figure I might as well be terrified while doing something useful." That earned her a quiet laugh. "That's a hell of a life philosophy." "It's gotten me this far." They stood in companionable silence, listening to the night sounds, coyotes yipping in the distance, an owl calling, the soft movement of horses in the corral. Charlotte found herself studying Wade's profile, wondering what he was thinking behind those careful gray eyes. He was still largely a mystery to her, this man she'd married. She knew the facts of his life, knew he worked hard and kept his word, but the actual person underneath? That remained locked away. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Depends on the question." "The fire Maria mentioned, the one that nearly destroyed your father's first homestead attempt. What really happened?" Wade's jaw tightened. Why does it matter? Because Crane mentioned it too. Said your father could never make the claim stick. I need to know what we're really up against. For a long moment, Charlotte thought he wouldn't answer. Then Wade sighed, a sound full of old grief and older anger. I was 8 years old. Pa had just started building on that same land, the property where our cabin stands now. He'd gotten preliminary approval, was waiting for the final claim to be processed. We were living in a tent while he built. Wade's voice went distant, remembering. One night, fire broke out. Spread fast, faster than any natural fire should have. Pa got me and Ma and Sarah out, but everything else burned. The tent, the supplies, the lumber for the house. Everything. And your father thought it was deliberate. He knew it was deliberate. Found traces of accelerant the next morning, but there was no proof, no witnesses. Crane's father, Harlan's old man, owned the land office magistrate. Investigation went nowhere. Wade's hands gripped the railing. Pa tried to rebuild, but the claim got tangled up in red tape. Requirements kept changing. Deadlines got moved up. Every time he met one condition, they'd add another. Finally, he had to abandon it or lose the ranch trying to fight. And now you're trying again. Now I'm trying again, and Crane's using the same playbook his father did. Legal challenges, delays, and if that doesn't work, Wade's voice hardened. He'll escalate. That's why we need to be up there, visible, established. Make it harder for him to pull the same tricks. Charlotte absorbed this, understanding now the weight Wade carried. This wasn't just about land or water rights. It was about finishing what his father started, about justice delayed for over 20 years. I won't let him burn you out again, she said quietly. Wade looked at her, surprise flickering across his face. That's not your fight. I'm your wife, Wade. Even if it's just on paper, that makes it my fight too. Charlotte met his eyes. Besides, I'm getting tired of men like Crane thinking they can take whatever they want just because they have money and power. Maybe it's time someone stood up to him. Something shifted in Wade's expression, the walls cracking a bit more. You really are stubborn, aren't they? Told you I was. Yeah, you did. He turned back to the darkness, but Charlotte thought she saw the ghost of a smile. Get some sleep, Charlotte. Tomorrow we start building something worth fighting for. Charlotte went to bed that night with the weight of the Derringer under her pillow, and Wade's words echoing in her mind. Something worth fighting for. She'd come west looking for survival, but maybe, just maybe, she'd found something more. The move to the homestead took 2 full days. They loaded the wagon with supplies, furniture, and everything Charlotte had determined essential for at least 3 months of isolated living. Maria packed enough food to feed a small army, fretting over whether they'd have enough coffee, enough flour, enough dried meat. We can always ride down for more supplies, Wade reminded her for the 3rd time. You'll be busy. Charlotte can't do everything. Better to be prepared. Maria tucked another jar of preserves into the crate. And you take care of her, Wade Blackthorne. She's a good girl, even if you married her for all the wrong reasons. Yes, ma'am, Wade said meekly, which made Charlotte hide a smile. They left the broken spur in Miguel's capable hands, with Tommy assigned to ride up weekly with messages and check if they needed anything. The journey to the homestead was slow, the wagon heavy, the trail rough, but Charlotte didn't mind. She rode Buttercup alongside the wagon, watching the landscape change as they climbed, feeling strangely like she was leaving one life behind and riding toward another. When they finally arrived at the cabin in the late afternoon sun, Wade began unloading with efficient precision while Charlotte explored her new home more thoroughly. The sleeping loft would be hers, Wade insisted, more privacy, warmer in winter. He'd sleep on a bedroll on the main floor until he could build a proper partition. We need to look married, not be married, he'd said firmly, and Charlotte had been grateful for the distinction. They worked until after dark, arranging furniture and unpacking supplies by lamplight. Maria had sent up curtains for the windows, and Charlotte hung them carefully, transforming the rough cabin into something more homelike. A rag rug went beside the stove. Dishes were arranged on shelves Wade had built into the walls. Her few books found homes on a small table beside the loft ladder. It's coming together, Wade said, looking around with something like satisfaction. Another week or two, we'll have this place looking properly settled. Charlotte descended the loft ladder, having just made up her bed with Maria's quilts. What's our story if the inspector comes? How long have we supposedly been living here? We say we've been coming up regularly for the past month, staying weekends while we finished construction. Now we're moving in permanently. Wade poured coffee from the pot he'd set on the stove. It's mostly true. I have been up here working weekends. What about visitors? Will people come by? Probably. Neighbors want to meet the new wife, see how serious we are about the claim. He handed her a cup. You'll need to play the part convincingly. Casual affection, like we've been married a while. Think you can manage that? Charlotte sipped the coffee, considering. Casual affection meant touches, smiles, the small intimacies married couples shared. It meant pretending to care for a man she barely knew, in front of people watching for signs of deception. I can manage, she said with more confidence than she felt. The first test came 3 days later. Charlotte was hanging laundry on a line Wade had strung between 2 trees when she heard horses approaching. Wade was working on clearing brush from what would eventually be a garden plot, but he dropped his axe immediately and moved to where his rifle leaned against the cabin wall. Expecting someone? Charlotte asked quietly. No. Wade's hand rested on the rifle, but didn't pick it up. Stay close. 2 riders emerged from the tree line, a man and a woman, both middle-aged, on serviceable horses. They had the weathered look of people who'd spent their lives outdoors, and the woman was smiling. Hello, the cabin, the man called out. We're the Hendersons, from the property east of here. Heard you folks were settling in. Wade's posture relaxed fractionally. Wade Blackthorne, this is my wife, Charlotte. Charlotte wiped her hands on her apron and stepped forward with a smile. How lovely to have neighbors. Would you like some coffee? I've just made fresh. Mrs. Henderson, call me Ruth, she insisted, dismounted with practiced ease. That would be wonderful, dear. It's a long ride over. For the next hour, Charlotte played hostess, serving coffee and the biscuits Maria had sent, while the Hendersons asked polite questions about where they'd come from and how they were settling in. Charlotte could feel them watching, evaluating, looking for the signs Wade had predicted. Were they really married? Were they genuinely settling, or just going through motions for the land claim? How did you two meet? Ruth asked, her eyes sharp despite her friendly smile. Charlotte glanced at Wade, who'd positioned himself near her chair with the casual stance of a husband comfortable in his wife's presence. I came looking for work at the Broken Spur. Wade offered me a position, and she let her smile turn slightly shy. We found we suited each other. Fast courtship, Mr. Henderson observed. When you know, Wade said, and casually rested his hand on Charlotte's shoulder. The touch was brief, impersonal, but it sold the story. No point waiting when you've found the right person. Charlotte reached up to pat his hand, a gesture that felt strange but looked natural, and saw Ruth's expression soften. The older woman was a romantic, Charlotte realized. She wanted to believe in love at first sight, in quick courtships and happy endings. Well, you picked a beautiful spot, Ruth said, looking around the cabin. That creek never runs dry, you know. Old Crane's been trying to get his hands on this water for years. So we've heard, Charlotte said carefully. Don't let him intimidate you. He's all bluster, that one. His father was the real danger, mean as a snake and twice as quick. Harlan's just greedy. Ruth set down her cup. But you watch yourselves anyway. Greedy men do foolish things when they want something bad enough. The Hendersons left with promises to visit again and invitations to dinner once Charlotte and Wade were more settled. Charlotte waved them off, maintaining her smile until they disappeared into the trees. Then she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. That was exhausting, she said. You did well. Wade was already moving back toward his brush clearing. Convincing. Was I? Charlotte looked at where his hand had rested on her shoulder, still feeling the ghost of the touch. It felt awkward. It looked real. That's what matters. But as Charlotte returned to her laundry, she found herself wondering if the awkwardness came from the pretense itself, or from the uncomfortable realization that Wade's touch hadn't been entirely unpleasant. That was dangerous territory, catching feelings for a man who'd married her purely for practical reasons. She'd already had her heart broken once by Richard Pemberton's pragmatism. She didn't need to repeat the mistake with Wade Blackthorne. The days fell into a rhythm. Wade worked on improving the property, clearing land, reinforcing the cabin, building a proper chicken coop for the hens Maria had sent up. Charlotte managed the household, cooked meals that improved with practice, and spent her evenings updating the ranch ledgers by lamplight. They were polite to each other, careful, maintaining the boundaries of their arrangement even as they grew more comfortable in each other's presence. But the outside world kept intruding. Tommy rode up on the 6th day with mail and supplies and handed Wade a letter that made his expression go dark. Charlotte was hanging herbs to dry, but paused, watching Wade's face as he read. "What is it?" "Land office. They're sending an inspector next week." Charlotte's stomach dropped. "That's sooner than expected." "Much sooner. Someone's pushing for a faster review." Wade crumpled the letter. "Probably Crane. He wants this resolved before we're too established to challenge." "Are we ready?" Wade looked around the cabin, at the improvements they'd made, at the life they'd been building. "We're going to have to be. The inspector comes in 5 days. That's not much time to make this place look like a long-term home." They spent those 5 days in frantic preparation. Wade built a permanent table and proper chairs. Charlotte hung more curtains, arranged their few personal items to look lived in, and even picked wildflowers for a jar on the windowsill. They created the fiction of a marriage through careful staging, his work clothes hanging beside her dresses, their books mingling on the shelf, 2 cups always waiting by the stove. On the 4th night, Charlotte was mending one of Wade's shirts when he emerged from his evening ablutions with his hair wet and slicked back, looking younger and somehow more vulnerable without the perpetual layer of dust. He paused when he saw what she was doing. "You don't have to do that. The inspector might notice if your clothes are falling apart. Besides, I need the practice. I'm terrible at sewing." She held up the shirt, examining her uneven stitches. "This would make my mother weep." Wade sat down across from her, watching her work. "Tell me about her. Your mother." Charlotte glanced up, surprised by the personal question. "She was proper, very concerned with appearances and social standing. But underneath all that, she was kind. She used to sneak me books that weren't considered appropriate for young ladies. Adventures, mysteries, things with actual excitement." Charlotte smiled at the memory. "She'd hide them in her sewing basket, and we'd read them together when my father was at his office. Sounds like she understood you." "She did. Better than I understood myself sometimes." Charlotte set down the mending. "What about your mother? You said she died when you were 12. Wade was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "She was strong. Had to be. Living out here with a man determined to build something from nothing. She never complained, even when things were hard, even when we had more hope than food." His voice softened. "She used to sing while she worked. Couldn't carry a tune to save her life, but she'd sing anyway." "Like me," Charlotte said. "Yeah, like you." Wade's eyes met hers, and something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, the shared grief of people who'd lost too much. "She would have liked you, I think. Would have appreciated someone willing to fight for what they believe in." Charlotte felt warmth bloom in her chest, dangerous and sweet. This was how it happened, she realized. This was how you started caring for someone. Small moments of vulnerability, shared memories, the slow revelation of the person beneath the armor. She needed to be careful. But when Wade smiled at her, really smiled, not just the ghost of humor, but genuine warmth, Charlotte felt her careful walls tremble. "We should sleep," she said abruptly, standing. "Big day tomorrow. More preparations." Charlotte, "Good night, Wade." She climbed the loft ladder before he could respond, before she could see whatever expression might be on his face. In her small loft space, she lay awake beneath Maria's quilts and tried to remember that this was temporary. A business arrangement. A marriage of convenience that would dissolve as soon as the land claim was secure. But somewhere between Phoenix and this mountain cabin, between a contract signed in desperation and the quiet rhythm of their shared days, something had begun to shift. Charlotte was beginning to care for Wade Blackthorne in ways that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with the man himself. And she had absolutely no idea what to do about it. The inspector arrived precisely at noon on a Tuesday, riding a bay mare with government stamps on the saddlebags. Charlotte saw him coming from the cabin window where she'd been pretending to read, actually watching the trail with mounting anxiety, and called out to Wade, who was splitting wood behind the house. "He's here." Wade set down the axe and wiped his hands on his pants. Remember what we discussed. We've been married 3 months, living here full-time for 6 weeks. We're happy, settled, building a future. I remember. Charlotte smoothed her dress, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and tried to slow her racing heart. Everything depended on the next few hours. The inspector was a slight man in his 40s with wire-rimmed spectacles and the pale complexion of someone who spent most of his time behind a desk. He introduced himself as Mr. Sir Edmund Whitmore from the Territorial Land Office and accepted Wade's handshake with the limp grip of someone unused to manual labor. Mr. and Mrs. Blackthorne, he said, producing a leather notebook from his saddlebag. Thank you for agreeing to this inspection on relatively short notice. Of course, Wade said smoothly. We want to cooperate fully with the homestead process. Excellent, excellent. Now, I'll need to verify a few things: residence, improvements, agricultural activity, and of course the legitimacy of your marital union. Whitmore's eyes flickered between them. I trust you understand that false claims are taken quite seriously by the territorial government. We understand, Charlotte said, stepping closer to Wade in what she hoped looked like natural wifely solidarity. We have nothing to hide. Whitmore spent the next hour examining everything. He measured the cabin dimensions, inspected the construction quality, checked the creek flow, and documented the water sources. He examined their garden plot, still mostly bare earth, but with neat rows marked out, and counted the chickens in their coop. He poked through their supplies, noted the books on the shelf, even examined the wear patterns on the floor to determine traffic flow and living habits. Charlotte felt stripped bare under his scrutiny, every careful detail they'd arranged suddenly seeming obvious and false. But she maintained her composure, answering his questions about her daily routine, their meal schedule, their plans for the property. Wade stood close throughout, occasionally touching her elbow or shoulder in the casual way of long-married couples, and Charlotte leaned into those touches even as her heart hammered. "And how did you two meet?" Whitmore asked, pen poised over his notebook. Charlotte had rehearsed this answer a dozen times, but her mouth went dry anyway. Wade's hand found the small of her back, steadying. "I came to the Broken Spur looking for employment," Charlotte said. "My father had recently passed and I needed work. Wade offered me a position helping with the ranch accounts." "And romance developed from there?" "We found we had common interests," Wade said. "Charlotte's educated, intelligent, not afraid of hard work. She understood what I was trying to build here. The marriage was practical at first, I'll admit. We both needed something the other could provide. But it became more than that." Whitmore's eyebrow rose. "More than that, how?" Charlotte felt Wade's hand tense slightly against her back. This was the moment, the question they'd both been dreading. They could claim passionate love, but Whitmore would never believe it. They could admit the practical arrangement, but that might invalidate the claim. The truth, she realized, had to be somewhere in the middle. "My first marriage proposal came from a man who claimed to love me, then abandoned me the moment I became inconvenient," Charlotte said quietly. "Wade offered me honesty instead of pretty words. A partnership built on respect and shared goals. That seemed more valuable than passion that could fade." She looked up at Wade and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. And somewhere along the way, respect became affection. Affection became trust. Trust became something worth keeping. It was as close to the truth as she dared speak, and for a moment she forgot they had an audience. Wade's eyes held hers, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, perhaps, or recognition of the thing neither of them had been willing to name. Whitmore cleared his throat. "I see. And you're both committed to maintaining residence here for the required 5 years?" "Yes," they said in unison. "Very well." Whitmore scribbled more notes. "I'll need to verify some details with your neighbors, the Hendersons, I believe, and I'll be filing a report with the land office within 2 weeks. Barring any complications, your claim should be approved within 90 days. "Complications?" Wade asked carefully. "There's a competing claim from a Mr. Harlan Crane. He's filed an objection based on prior water rights and questionable timing of your marriage." Whitmore's expression remained neutral. "The office will need to investigate those objections before making a final determination." Charlotte felt Wade's hand tighten against her back, but his voice remained level. Crane's been trying to steal this land for 20 years. His objections are harassment, nothing more. That will be for the office to determine, Mr. Blackthorne. But I will note in my report that you and Mrs. Blackthorne appear to be establishing a genuine homestead with legitimate intent. Whitmore closed his notebook. I'd recommend documenting all improvements you make. Photographs if possible, dated receipts for materials, anything that proves continuous residence and agricultural development. We'll do that, Charlotte said. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. After the inspector left, Charlotte and Wade stood in the cabin doorway watching him ride away. Neither spoke until he disappeared into the trees. That went better than expected, Wade said finally. Did it? He seemed suspicious about the marriage timing. Everyone's suspicious about the timing, but you... Wade turned to face her. What you said about respect becoming affection, that was good, convincing. Charlotte couldn't quite meet his eyes. It wasn't entirely a lie. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken things. Then Wade cleared his throat and stepped away, breaking the moment. I should finish that woodpile. Winter's not that far off, and we'll need... A gunshot cracked through the afternoon air. Wade had Charlotte on the ground before she could even process what had happened, his body covering hers, one hand reaching for the rifle he'd left just inside the door. A second shot splinged off the cabin's stone chimney, sending chips of rock flying. Stay down, Wade hissed. Get inside. Now. Charlotte scrambled through the doorway on her hands and knees, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. Wade followed, slamming the door and dropping the bar across it. Another shot shattered one of the precious glass windows, and Charlotte screamed despite herself. The loft, Wade commanded. Get up there and stay low. Don't show yourself at any window. What about you? I'm going to figure out where they're shooting from. He was already moving to the broken window, rifle raised, using the wall for cover. Charlotte, the loft, now! She climbed the ladder with shaking hands, her earlier composure shattered. From the loft, she could see Wade positioned at the window, scanning the tree line with deadly focus. Two more shots came in quick succession, one hitting the door, one going wild over the roof. 4 shooters, Wade called up to her. Maybe 5. Professional spacing. This isn't some drunk ranch hand taking pot shots. It's Crane, Charlotte said, her voice steadier than she felt. It has to be. Probably as men, Crane's too smart to be here himself. Wade fired once, the report deafening in the enclosed space. But knowing who sent them doesn't help us much right now. The shooting continued sporadically for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Wade returned fire when he had clear targets, forcing the shooters to keep their distance. Charlotte stayed in the loft with the Derringer clutched in her sweating palm, watching Wade's back and praying this wouldn't be how their strange partnership ended, huddled in a half-finished cabin while Harlan Crane's hired guns murdered them for water rights. Then, as suddenly as it started, the shooting stopped. Wade remained at the window, tense and ready, scanning the forest. Could be a trick, trying to draw us out. Or they accomplished what they wanted, Charlotte said, climbing down from the loft despite Wade's warning look. They've established that we're vulnerable up here, that they can reach us whenever they want. Wade's jaw clenched. I'm riding down to get the sheriff. This crossed a line. Even Crane can't explain away an armed attack. And leave me here alone? What if they come back? You can shoot. You have the Derringer and the spare rifle. Bar the door after me and don't open it for anyone but me or someone you know by voice. Wade was already moving, checking his ammunition, strapping on his gun belt. I'll be back before dark with Sheriff Dalton and some deputies. Wade... He crossed to her in 3 strides, taking her face in his hands. The gesture was so unexpected, so uncharacteristically tender, that Charlotte's protest died in her throat. I know you're scared, he said, his gray eyes intense. Hell, I'm scared, but I need you to be strong for a few more hours. Can you do that? Charlotte nodded, not trusting her voice. That's my girl. Wade pressed a quick, hard kiss to her forehead, the first time his lips had touched her since their courthouse wedding, then released her and headed for the door. Bar it behind me. Don't open it for anyone. Then he was gone, riding hard down the mountain trail on his sorrel gelding. Charlotte dropped the bar across the door and sagged against it, her legs finally giving out. She sat on the floor, the Derringer still in her hand, and tried not to think about the shattered window. The bullet holes in her home, the very real possibility that Harlan Crane was willing to kill to get what he wanted. The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. Charlotte reloaded the rifles, positioned ammunition within easy reach, and tried to watch all the windows at once. Every sound made her jump, the wind in the trees, the chickens squawking, the creak of settling logs. She'd never felt more alone in her life. Dusk was falling when she heard horses approaching. Charlotte positioned herself by the broken window with the rifle raised, her hand steadier than she'd expected. "Charlotte, it's Wade. I've got Sheriff Dalton with me. Don't shoot." The relief nearly buckled her knees. She lowered the rifle and unbarred the door, and Wade swept inside with Sheriff Dalton and 2 deputies behind him. The sheriff was a gray-haired man in his 50s with the weathered face of someone who'd seen too much violence and not enough justice. "Mrs. Blackthorne," he said, tipping his hat. "You hurt?" "No, scared, but not hurt." "Good. That's good." Dalton surveyed the damage, the shattered window, the bullet holes scarring the walls. "Wade filled me in on the ride up. Sounds like a coordinated attack, not random mischief." "It was 5 men at least," Charlotte said, maybe more. "They had us pinned down for nearly half an hour." "And you think Harlan Crane sent them?" "Who else?" Wade's voice was hard. "He's been threatening us for weeks. Warned me that accidents happen to people who overreach. Thinking someone did something and proving it in court are different things." Dalton pulled out his own notebook, so similar to the land inspector's that Charlotte felt a hysterical laugh building in her throat. "You see any faces? Recognize any horses or tack?" Charlotte shook her head, and Wade's expression darkened further. "They stayed in the tree line, too far for identification." "Then we've got a problem. I can ride out to Crane's place, ask some questions, but without witnesses or evidence, he'll just deny everything. Probably has alibis lined up for all his men already." "So what are we supposed to do?" Charlotte demanded. "Just sit here and wait for them to come back and finish the job?" "No, ma'am. I'll post a deputy up here for the next week. Keep watch. And I'll make it clear to Crane that any more accidents will bring serious consequences." Dalton's expression softened. "I know it's not much. The law moves slow out here, and men like Crane know how to work around it, but I won't let him get away with attempted murder." "Attempted murder assumes they were trying to kill us," Wade said quietly. "I think they were just trying to scare us, show us we're not safe up here." "And if you're not safe, you can't maintain residence," Charlotte added, understanding dawning. "The homestead claim requires continuous occupation. If we abandon the property, we lose it." Exactly. Wade looked at Dalton. "Can you prove intimidation? Conspiracy to interfere with a legal land claim?" "Easier to prove than murder, but still not easy. I'd need someone willing to testify that Crane ordered it, and none of his men are likely to turn on him." Dalton moved toward the door. "Let me go talk to him. See if I can shake something loose. In the meantime, you two decide if you want to stay up here with a deputy watching your backs, or retreat to the Broken Spur until things settle down." After the sheriff and his deputies left, one staying behind to set up camp near the creek, Wade and Charlotte sat at their damaged table in the gathering darkness. Neither had lit a lamp yet. The twilight seemed safer somehow, less exposed. "We have to stay," Charlotte said finally. "I know. If we leave, even for a few days, Crane wins. He can claim we abandoned the homestead, that we're not serious about the claim." "I know," Wade repeated. "But staying means putting you in danger. That's not what I agreed to when I asked you to marry me." Charlotte looked at him across the shadowy table. "You asked me to help you secure this land. That's what I'm doing." "I asked you to help with paperwork, not risk your life." "Sometimes they're the same thing." Charlotte reached across the table, finding his hand in the dimness. His fingers closed around hers immediately, rough and warm. "I'm not leaving, Wade. Not unless you want to give up on your father's dream entirely." "I don't care about the dream if it gets you killed." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Charlotte's breath caught because this was the thing they'd been dancing around for weeks. The fact that somewhere between a contract and a marriage certificate, between shared meals and quiet conversations, they'd started to actually care about each other. Not just partnership, not just respect. Something deeper and more dangerous. "Wade, don't." His hand tightened on hers. "Don't say anything. Just let me get through this. We're going to set up a watch rotation, you and me and the deputy. No one's alone, ever. We document everything, every threat, every incident. We build a case that even Crane's lawyers can't dismiss. And we hold this land until the claim is approved or hell freezes over, whichever comes first. And after? After the claim is approved and you don't need a wife anymore? Wade was silent for so long that Charlotte thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "Let's survive first. Then we'll figure out the after." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even a promise. But it was something, an acknowledgement that the after mattered, that maybe the arrangement they'd started had become something neither of them was quite ready to end. The deputy, a young man named Foster, who looked barely old enough to shave, proved to be competent despite his youth. He set up a patrol pattern around the cabin, checking the tree line every few hours and keeping a rifle close. Wade reinforced the broken window with boards and positioned furniture to provide better cover if shooting started again. Charlotte cooked dinner over a fire that felt too bright, too exposed, and tried not to flinch at every sound from the forest. They ate in tense silence. Then Wade insisted on taking the first watch while Charlotte tried to sleep in the loft. She lay awake for hours, listening to Wade's footsteps moving around the cabin, the occasional murmur of conversation as he checked in with Deputy Foster. The Derringer was under her pillow again, a cold comfort. She must have dozed eventually because she woke to Wade's hand on her shoulder and gray dawn light filtering through the loft window. "Your turn," he said quietly. "I need a few hours." Charlotte climbed down to find Wade already stretched out on his bedroll by the stove, asleep almost before his head hit the folded blanket he used as a pillow. Exhaustion was carved into every line of his face, and Charlotte felt a fierce protective surge that surprised her with its intensity. This man had risked everything for a piece of land and a dead father's dream. The least she could do was let him sleep safely. She took up position by the window with the rifle across her lap and watched the sun rise over the mountain meadow. The beauty of it seemed obscene somehow, given the violence of the previous day. But the world didn't care about human conflicts. The creek kept running, the birds kept singing, and the wildflowers kept blooming regardless of who owned the land they grew on. Deputy Foster came in around mid-morning looking tired but alert. "All quiet overnight, ma'am. But I found tracks down by the creek. 5 horses, maybe 6. They were watching the cabin after dark." Charlotte's stomach clenched. "They didn't leave. Not far, anyway. They're still out there somewhere. Should I wake Wade?" "Let him sleep a bit longer. I'll keep watch." Foster accepted the coffee she poured him gratefully. "If you don't mind me asking, ma'am, why is this land so important? Important enough to risk dying for?" Charlotte looked at Wade sleeping by the stove, at the bullet holes in her walls, at the life they'd been trying to build in this rough cabin. "It's not about the land itself. It's about having something that's yours, something no one can take away just because they're richer or more powerful. Out here, that's the only kind of freedom that matters." Foster nodded slowly. "My pa always said the West was built by people too stubborn to quit. I guess you and Mr. Blackthorne fit that description." "I guess we do." The day passed without incident, though Charlotte felt eyes watching from the forest. Crane's men were still out there, waiting, watching, looking for another opportunity to drive them out. Wade woke mid-afternoon and took over the watch with grim efficiency, sending Foster to get some rest. That evening, as Charlotte was preparing dinner, Tommy arrived on horseback with supplies from the Broken Spur and a letter that made Wade's expression go thunderous. "What is it?" Charlotte asked. Wade handed her the paper. It was from Harlan Crane's attorney, formally notifying them that Crane was filing an injunction to halt the homestead claim pending investigation of fraudulent marriage and misrepresentation of intent to establish residence. The letter cited the timing of their marriage, the rushed move to the property, and credible concerns about the legitimacy of the petitioner's claims. "He's doing exactly what he did to your father," Charlotte said, fury burning through her fear. "Tying everything up in legal challenges, making it too expensive and time-consuming to fight." "Yeah, well, I'm not my father." Wade's voice was cold. "And this time, there's a paper trail. Sheriff Dalton's investigating the shooting. The land inspector filed a positive report, and we're not going anywhere." Tommy shifted uncomfortably. "Boss, Miguel sent me to tell you that some of Crane's men have been hanging around the Broken Spur too. Nothing threatening yet, but they're watching the place, asking questions about you and Mrs. Blackthorne." Looking for ammunition, Charlotte said. Something they can use to prove our marriage is a fraud. Let them look. Wade's jaw set in a stubborn line she was beginning to recognize. They won't find anything because there's nothing to find. We're married. We're living here. We're building a life. That's all the law requires, and that's what we're going to keep doing. After Tommy left, Wade and Charlotte sat on the cabin's front step, the safest place to take air, given that Deputy Foster was patrolling behind the house, and watched the stars emerge. The violence of the past 24 hours hung between them, but so did something else. A determination. A partnership that had been forged in desperation, but was being tempered into something stronger. I've been thinking, Wade said after a long silence, about what happens if Crane escalates. If he doesn't just shoot to scare, but shoots to kill. Charlotte's blood went cold. Don't. We have to face it. If something happens to me, you need to know what to do. The ranch is in my name, but I'll change the deed to include you. Equal ownership. If I die, everything goes to you. The broken spur, this homestead claim, everything. Miguel knows how to run the operation. You know the finances. You could sell it or keep it or stop. Charlotte's voice broke. Stop planning for your death. We're going to survive this. Wade looked at her, and in the starlight, his eyes were softer than she'd ever seen them. I hope so. But if we don't, I need you to know that this... He gestured at the cabin, the land, the mountains rising dark against the star-filled sky. This wasn't a mistake. Marrying you wasn't a mistake. Even if it ends badly, even if Crane wins, even if... Charlotte kissed him. She didn't plan it, didn't think about it, just closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his, cutting off his morbid planning with the most effective method she could think of. For a heartbeat, Wade froze in surprise. Then his hand came up to cup the back of her head, and he kissed her back with a hunger that stole her breath. It wasn't like their courthouse kiss, perfunctory and contractual. This was real. Wade's other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer, and Charlotte went willingly, her hands fisting in his shirt. He kissed like a man starving, like he'd been holding back for weeks and had finally broken, and Charlotte matched him with equal desperation because she'd been holding back too. Holding back the feelings that had grown despite her best efforts, the care that had blossomed despite the contract between them, the love that had taken root in the cracks of their practical arrangement. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. Charlotte, don't analyze it, she whispered. Don't make it complicated. Just accept that it happened. It changes things. I know. The contract said, damn the contract. Charlotte pulled back enough to meet his eyes. Wade, I came out here expecting survival, a job, safety. I didn't expect to care about you. I didn't expect to want this marriage to be real, but I do. And I hope, you might feel the same. Wade's thumb traced her cheekbone, his touch gentle despite the calluses. I told myself I was marrying you for the land claim, for the practical reasons. But the truth is, I've been lying to myself for weeks. Maybe from the moment you stood in my yard and demanded honesty instead of pretty words. His smile was crooked, vulnerable. You terrify me, Charlotte Blackthorne. You make me want things I'd given up hoping for. What things? A real marriage, a real life, someone to build this dream with instead of just surviving alone. Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. Those are the things I want too. They kissed again, slower this time, and Charlotte thought about the strange path that had brought them here. A desperate proposal, a contractual marriage, a slow transformation of convenience into something real. If someone had told her 2 months ago that she'd be sitting on a bullet-scarred cabin step, kissing a taciturn rancher under the Arizona stars, she would have thought them mad. But here she was, and she'd never felt more certain of anything in her life. Deputy Foster's cough from around the cabin corner made them spring apart like guilty teenagers. Sorry to interrupt, Foster said, his voice carefully neutral. But I saw movement in the trees, thought you should know. Wade was on his feet immediately, hand going to his gun. How many? Can't tell, just shadows moving. Could be deer, could be men. Charlotte stood, her moment of happiness evaporating. They're coming back. Maybe. Or maybe they're just watching again. Wade moved inside to grab his rifle. Foster, you take the north side. I'll cover the east. Charlotte, I know. Loft. Stay low. Don't show myself at windows. She checked her derringer was loaded. I'm not helpless, Wade. I know you're not, but I just... He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. Then he crossed to her, kissed her hard and fast, and said, Stay alive. We have a lot to figure out once we get through this. You too, Charlotte whispered. They took their positions and the waiting began again. But this time, Charlotte wasn't just fighting for a contract or a land claim or even survival. She was fighting for the future she'd just discovered she wanted. The one where this marriage was real, where she and Wade built something together, where the life they'd been pretending to have became the life they actually lived. The shadows in the forest moved closer, and Charlotte gripped her derringer, ready for whatever came next. The shadows resolved into shapes, 4 men on horseback, moving through the trees with the careful deliberation of people who knew they were being watched. Charlotte's heart hammered as she tracked them from the loft window, the derringer heavy in her sweating palm. Wade was positioned below at the east window, rifle ready, while Deputy Foster covered the north side of the cabin. Hold your fire unless they shoot first, Wade called out, his voice carrying clearly in the mountain stillness. Foster, you see anything from your side? 2 more riders, boss, coming from the creek side. We're surrounded. Charlotte's stomach dropped. 6 men against 3, and one of the 3 was her, barely trained, armed with a weapon that was only good for close range. If shooting started, their odds were grim. Then a voice called out from the darkness, cultured and familiar. Blackthorn, I'm here to talk, not fight. Tell your people to hold their fire. Wade's entire body went rigid. That's Crane himself. He came personally? Charlotte whispered down. Arrogant bastard thinks we won't shoot him. But Wade raised his voice. Show yourself, Crane. Hands where I can see them. Harlan Crane rode into the clearing on his palomino, hands raised in a gesture of peace that fooled no one. His men stayed in the trees, dark shapes with rifles across their saddles. In the moonlight, Crane looked almost grandfatherly, white hair gleaming, expensive clothes immaculate despite the ride through the forest. Only his eyes gave away his true nature, cold, calculating, utterly without mercy. Quite the reception, Crane said mildly. You'd think I was an outlaw rather than your neighbor. Neighbors don't shoot up cabins, Wade said flatly. What do you want? To offer you one final chance to be reasonable. Crane dismounted with the ease of a man half his age. I've filed an injunction against your homestead claim. My attorneys assure me it will be successful. There are simply too many irregularities in your application. The suspicious timing of your marriage, the rushed residency, the clear evidence of fraud. There's no fraud, Charlotte called down before she could stop herself. We're legally married and legally residing on this claim. Crane's eyes lifted to the loft window, and his smile was poisonous. Ah, Mrs. Blackthorn, tell me, how much is he paying you to play house? It must be a substantial sum to risk your life in this wilderness. Nobody's paying anybody, Wade said, and you're trespassing. State your business or get off my land. Your land? Crane laughed. You really believe you can win this, don't you? That you can somehow succeed where your father failed? Let me tell you what's going to happen, Wade. My injunction will delay your claim for at least 6 months. During that time, you'll have to maintain continuous residence up here through the autumn rains and the winter snows, while also running your ranch down in the valley. You'll bleed money trying to do both. Eventually, you'll miss a payment on your mortgage, or fail to meet a residency requirement, or make some small mistake that invalidates your entire claim. And when that happens, I'll be waiting to purchase the broken spur at auction for pennies on the dollar. That's your plan? Charlotte said. Harass us until we collapse under the strain? That's not a plan, my dear. That's simply inevitability. Crane remounted his horse. But I'm feeling generous tonight. I'll offer you $40,000 for the broken spur and your homestead claim, free and clear. You can walk away, start fresh somewhere else, and avoid the unpleasantness that's coming. No, Wade said. You haven't even considered... No. Now get off my land before I shoot you for trespassing. Crane's expression hardened. You're making a terrible mistake. I tried to be civilized about this, but you're forcing my hand. Remember that when things get worse. Remember that I gave you a chance to walk away." He wheeled his horse around and disappeared into the trees, his men following like shadows. Within moments, the clearing was empty again, but the threat lingered like smoke. Deputy Foster emerged from his position, his young face pale. "He's planning something bad. That was a final warning." "I know," Wade said grimly. He looked up at Charlotte. "Come down. We need to talk." They gathered around the table, Wade, Charlotte, and Deputy Foster, and faced the reality of their situation. Crane had the money, the lawyers, and the willingness to use violence. They had a marriage of convenience that might not survive legal scrutiny, a handful of allies, and a dream that was beginning to look like a death sentence. "We could take his offer," Foster said hesitantly. $40,000 is a lot of money. You could buy land somewhere else, start fresh where Crane can't reach you." "No," Charlotte and Wade said simultaneously. They looked at each other, and Charlotte saw her own determination reflected in Wade's eyes. They'd come too far to surrender now. "Then we need evidence," Charlotte said. "Something concrete that proves Crane ordered the shooting, that proves he's been sabotaging homestead claims for decades. Sheriff Dalton can't act without proof." "Crane's too smart to leave evidence," Wade said. "He uses intermediaries, keeps his hands clean. Everyone makes mistakes, even Crane." Charlotte's mind was racing, thinking through possibilities. "What about his men, the ones who actually pulled the triggers? They're the weak link." Foster leaned forward. "You'd need to get one of them to turn on Crane, testify against him. But that's not going to happen. Crane pays too well, and his men know what happens to traitors." "Unless we give them a better reason to talk," Charlotte said slowly. "What if we could prove that Crane's planning to betray them? That he's setting them up to take the fall?" Wade's eyebrows rose. "You have an idea." "The beginning of one. Crane's smart, but he's also arrogant. He came here personally tonight because he wanted to gloat, wanted to see us break. That kind of arrogance makes people careless." Charlotte stood pacing. "He filed that injunction through his attorneys. There must be paperwork, correspondence, maybe even instructions that could be used against him. If we could get access to those documents..." "That's breaking and entering," Foster said nervously. "I can't be part of that." "You won't be. You'll be here, guarding the property like you're supposed to." Charlotte looked at Wade. "But Wade and I could ride into town tomorrow, visit Crane's attorney under the pretense of discussing a settlement. While we're there, maybe we see something we shouldn't." It was a terrible plan, full of holes and dependent on luck they didn't have, but Wade was already nodding, a fierce smile crossing his face. "It's crazy enough that he won't see it coming," Wade said. "Crane thinks we're on the defensive. He won't expect us to go on the attack." They spent the rest of the night refining the plan. Charlotte would request a meeting with Crane's attorney, a man named Bartholomew Sutton, who had offices in Phoenix, claiming she wanted to discuss settlement terms without Wade's knowledge. It would play into Crane's assumptions about their marriage being fraudulent, about Charlotte being a reluctant participant looking for an escape. While she kept Sutton occupied, Wade would search the office for anything incriminating. It was risky, possibly illegal, and could backfire catastrophically, but doing nothing meant slowly losing to Crane's war of attrition. At least this way, they were taking control of their fate. They left at dawn, telling Deputy Foster they were riding to the Broken Spur to check on the ranch. It wasn't entirely a lie. They would stop there on the way back. But first, they had to infiltrate the office of Crane's attorney and hope they found something useful before getting caught. The ride down to Phoenix took most of the morning. Charlotte rehearsed her performance. The unhappy wife, trapped in a loveless arrangement, looking for a way out. It wasn't hard to channel the fear and uncertainty, though the loveless part was now entirely fiction. She caught Wade watching her as they rode, his expression unreadable. "What?" she asked. "Just thinking about how much you've changed since that first day, when you showed up at the ranch looking for work." "I'm still the same person." "No, you're not. That woman was running from something. You're running toward something now, fighting for it." Wade's smile was small but genuine. "It's a good look on you." Charlotte felt warmth bloom in her chest despite the danger ahead. "We might fail at this, you know. Might end up in jail for breaking into Sutton's office. Then we'll fail together. That's got to count for something." They arrived in Phoenix mid-afternoon and went their separate ways. Charlotte to Sutton's office, Wade to position himself in the alley behind the building. Charlotte's hands were steady as she climbed the stairs to the second floor and knocked on the frosted glass door marked Bartholomew Sutton, Attorney at Law. The man who answered was younger than she'd expected, maybe 40, with slicked hair and the sharp-eyed look of someone always calculating angles. His smile was professionally warm as he ushered her inside. "Mrs. Blackthorne, what an unexpected pleasure. Please sit. Can I offer you tea?" "No, thank you." Charlotte perched on the edge of the offered chair, playing nervous. "I need to speak with you confidentially. About my husband's homestead claim." Sutton's eyes gleamed with interest. "I'm listening." "The marriage was a mistake. Wade needed a wife for the claim, and I needed—" Charlotte let her voice crack slightly. "I needed safety, security, but I didn't understand what I was agreeing to. The isolation, the danger, the constant threat from Mr. Crane's men. I want out." "I see." Sutton leaned back in his chair, studying her. "And what exactly do you want from me?" "I want to know my options. Can I get an annulment? Would that invalidate the homestead claim? And if I testify that the marriage was fraudulent, that it was only ever a business arrangement, would that help resolve Mr. Crane's injunction?" It was everything Crane would want to hear, and Sutton's expression showed he knew it. "Mrs. Blackthorne, I'm Mr. Crane's attorney. Anything you tell me could be used against your husband." "I understand. That's why I'm here." Charlotte twisted her hands in her lap. "I just want to go home, back east, away from all this." Sutton stood, moving to a filing cabinet. "Let me pull Mr. Crane's file. We should discuss this properly, see what arrangements can be made." As soon as his back was turned, Charlotte glanced at the window. She couldn't see Wade, but she knew he was there, waiting for her signal. She stood and moved to the window, fiddling with the latch as if nervous, and pushed it open. "It's so warm in here," she said apologetically. "Do you mind?" "Not at all." Sutton was absorbed in his files, pulling out a thick folder marked Blackthorne Homestead Challenge. Charlotte's heart raced. That was exactly what they needed. She just had to keep Sutton distracted long enough for Wade to get inside and photograph it. "Mr. Sutton, before we discuss specifics, I need to understand something. If I testify against Wade, will Mr. Crane guarantee my safety? I'm worried about retaliation." Sutton turned, his expression calculating. "Mr. Crane is a reasonable man. I'm sure we can work out protective arrangements. But first, I need to know exactly what you're willing to testify to." For the next 20 minutes, Charlotte spun a story of coercion and deception, watching Sutton's face grow more satisfied with each revelation. She claimed Wade had threatened her, promised her money he didn't have, forced her into the marriage against her will. It made her sick to say the words, to betray Wade even in fiction. But she kept Sutton's attention fixed on her and away from the window where Wade was now silently climbing inside. Wade moved like a ghost, his boots making no sound on the floor. He positioned himself behind a large bookshelf, out of Sutton's line of sight, and Charlotte saw him pull out a small camera, borrowed from the newspaper office that morning, and begin photographing pages from the file Sutton had left open on his desk. "This is all very helpful," Sutton was saying, "but I'll need you to sign an affidavit, a formal statement we can submit to the court." "Of course. I'll do whatever's necessary." Charlotte stood, moving to the desk as if to look at the documents. In reality, she was blocking Sutton's view of Wade. "Should we do that now?" "Let me draft something first. It needs to be worded carefully for maximum legal impact." Sutton reached for the file. And Wade chose that moment to sneeze. The sound was small, quickly stifled, but in the quiet office, it might as well have been a gunshot. Sutton's head snapped around, his eyes widening as he saw Wade emerge from behind the bookshelf, camera in hand. "What the— Security!" Sutton lunged for the door, but Charlotte was faster. She grabbed his arm, using all her weight to pull him off balance. Sutton stumbled, cursing, and Wade was there, pinning the attorney's arms behind his back. "Sorry about this," Wade said, sounding remarkably calm for a man committing what was probably several felonies. "But we needed those documents." "You're insane, both of you. This is breaking and entering, assault." "And what you've got in that file is conspiracy and fraud," Charlotte said, snatching the folder from the desk. She flipped through it quickly, her eyes widening. "Wade, look at this. There are letters from Crane ordering Sutton to delay the homestead review, instructions on how to bribe the land office clerk. And here, she pulled out a page, her hand shaking. A contract with someone named John Davies to discourage homesteaders through whatever means necessary. That's a hired gun. Crane hired someone to shoot at us. Wade's grip tightened on Sutton. Who's John Davies? I don't know what you're talking about, Sutton spat. Then you won't mind if we take this file to Sheriff Dalton. Charlotte was already gathering pages, shuffling them into her bag. I'm sure he'll be very interested in your client's activities. You can't. That's privileged attorney-client communication. Not when it's evidence of a crime, Wade said, and conspiracy to murder trumps privilege. They left Sutton locked in his own office. They'd taken the key and jammed the door from the outside, buying themselves time, and ran for their horses. Charlotte's hands were shaking so badly she could barely mount Buttercup, but Wade helped her up and then they were riding hard for the sheriff's office, the stolen documents bouncing in Charlotte's saddlebag. Sheriff Dalton took one look at their faces and ushered them into his office, closing the door. Charlotte dumped the contents of her bag on his desk, papers, photographs, damning evidence of Crane's decades of corruption. Where did you get this? Dalton asked, his weathered face grave. Sutton's office, Wade admitted. We broke in. Jesus, Mary and Joseph. Dalton sank into his chair. You know I can't use illegally obtained evidence in court? Charlotte's heart plummeted. But it proves everything. Crane's been bribing officials, hiring guns, sabotaging homestead claims for years. I know what it proves. But the way you got it makes it inadmissible. Dalton held up a hand as Wade started to protest. However, it does tell me where to look. I can use this to get warrants, to interview witnesses, to build a legitimate case. You've given me a roadmap. How long will that take? Wade asked. Weeks, maybe months. We don't have months. Crane's injunction goes forward in 3 days. Dalton studied the documents, his expression troubled. There might be one thing. This name here, John Davies, I know him. He's one of Crane's ranch hands. Been with him about 5 years. If I can bring him in, get him to testify. He looked up. He'd need protection, witness protection, probably relocation after the trial. That's a lot to ask of a man. But it's possible. Charlotte leaned forward. If Davies testifies, Crane goes down. If Davies testifies to ordering the shooting, to other incidents of intimidation and sabotage, and if I can corroborate it with this paper trail you've provided, yeah, Crane goes down. His injunction gets dismissed, his land empire starts crumbling, and you folks get your homestead. Wade and Charlotte exchanged glances. It wasn't perfect, but it was a chance. Do it, Wade said. Bring Davies in. Dalton stood, already reaching for his hat. I'll need a few days. You two need to stay somewhere safe, not the homestead, not the broken spur. Crane's going to figure out you robbed Sutton's office, and he'll come looking. We can stay at the boarding house, Charlotte said. Mrs. Kowalski's place. She won't talk. Good. Stay there, keep your heads down, and let me work. Dalton's expression softened. You did good today, even if you did it illegally. Now, let me finish the job proper. They spent 3 days in a cramped room at Mrs. Kowalski's boarding house, waiting for word from Dalton. Wade paced like a caged animal, while Charlotte tried to distract herself with books she couldn't focus on. At night, they lay in the narrow bed. Sharing it had seemed natural somehow, after everything, and Wade held her close while they both pretended to sleep. Whatever happens, Wade said on the third night, his voice rough in the darkness, I want you to know that marrying you was the best decision I ever made, even if we lose everything tomorrow. Charlotte turned in his arms, finding his mouth in the dark. They kissed slowly, tenderly, and Charlotte felt tears slip down her cheeks, because she'd finally found something worth keeping and the universe seemed determined to rip it away. We're not going to lose, she whispered against his lips. We've come too far. The next morning, Sheriff Dalton appeared at their door with news. Got him. Davies agreed to testify in exchange for immunity and relocation. He's scared of Crane, but he's more scared of hanging for attempted murder. We've got statements, we've got corroboration, and I've got warrants for Crane's arrest. Wade grabbed Charlotte's hand, squeezing so hard it hurt. When? Now. I've got deputies surrounding Crane's ranch. I'm riding out to bring him in, and I want you two with me. You deserve to see this." They rode out in a group: Dalton, 4 deputies, Wade, and Charlotte. The Triple C Ranch sprawled across Prime Valley land, its wealth evident in every building and fence. Crane's men watched them approach with wary eyes, but none moved to interfere when Dalton dismounted and walked to the main house. Crane emerged onto his porch, immaculate as always, but Charlotte saw the tightness around his eyes. He knew. Somehow, he already knew. "Sheriff Dalton, to what do I owe this invasion?" "Harlan Crane, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, bribery of public officials, fraud, and about a dozen other charges I'll read to you on the way to jail." Dalton produced handcuffs. "You have the right to—" "This is absurd. On whose testimony?" "John Davies, for one. Bartholomew Sutton for another. He turned on you the minute he realized he was going down with your ship. And we've got documentary evidence of 20 years of corruption." Dalton stepped forward. "You can come peaceful, or you can come fighting. Either way, you're coming." For a long moment, Crane stood frozen on his porch, his empire crumbling around him. Then his shoulders sagged, and he extended his wrists for the handcuffs. "You think you've won," he said, looking directly at Wade. "But running this land takes more than stubbornness. You'll fail on your own, without me to fight against." "Then I'll fail on my own terms," Wade said, "not yours." They watched the sheriff lead Crane away, and Charlotte felt the tension that had been coiled in her chest for weeks finally release. It was over. Crane was arrested, his injunction would be dismissed, their homestead claim would go through. They'd won. Wade pulled her into his arms right there in Crane's yard, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "We did it," he said into her hair. "We actually did it." "We did," Charlotte agreed, her own arms wrapped around his waist. "Together." The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal proceedings and paperwork. Crane's arrest revealed a network of corruption that reached deep into the territorial government, and the resulting investigation swept through Phoenix like a cleansing fire. Several land office officials resigned, Sutton was disbarred, and Crane's carefully built empire began to fracture as his victims came forward with decades of grievances. The homestead claim was approved without further challenge. Wade and Charlotte received the official deed 1 month after Crane's arrest, and they rode up to the cabin together to celebrate. The summer was fading into autumn, the meadow grass turning gold, and the air carried the first hint of coming winter. "This is really ours now," Charlotte said, standing in the doorway of the cabin they'd defended. "No one can take it away." "Ours," Wade agreed. He came to stand behind her, his arms circling her waist. "Though I've been thinking about that." Charlotte turned in his embrace. "Thinking what?" "Our contract. The one we signed that first night." Wade reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded paper, worn now from being carried. "It says you're free to leave with 6 months' wages once the claim is approved. So technically, you're free to go." Charlotte's heart clenched. "Do you want me to go?" "God, no." Wade's hands tightened on her waist. "But I want you to stay because you choose to, not because a contract says you have to. So I'm asking, Charlotte Blackthorne, will you stay married to me? Will you build this life with me, not as part of a business arrangement, but as my real wife?" Tears blurred Charlotte's vision. "You're proposing to me? We're already married. Then I'm proposing that we stay married, for real this time, for love." Wade's smile was crooked, vulnerable. "What do you say?" Charlotte took the contract from his hand, walked to the stove, and dropped it into the fire. They watched it burn together, the legal words blackening and curling into ash. When it was gone, Charlotte turned back to Wade and said, "I say yes. I've been saying yes since the moment you kissed me under the stars." Wade kissed her again now, slow and deep, and Charlotte felt the last walls between them crumble into dust. This was what she'd been searching for when she fled Philadelphia, not just survival, not just employment, but a place to belong. A person to build a life with, a love worth fighting for. They spent the autumn finishing the cabin, adding a real floor and a second room. The Hendersons became regular visitors, along with other homesteaders who'd been freed from Crane's shadow. The Broken Spur thrived under Miguel's management, and Wade split his time between the ranch and the homestead, building both into something sustainable. Winter came early that year, blanketing the mountains in snow. Charlotte learned to cook properly under Maria's patient instruction, to ride without looking like she'd fall off at any moment, to shoot straight when coyotes threatened their small flock of chickens. She kept the books for both properties, built a reputation in Phoenix as someone who could untangle complex finances, and even started helping other homesteaders with their claims. And every night, she fell asleep in Wade Blackthorn's arms, grateful for the desperate gamble that had brought her here. Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers in the meadow, and Charlotte woke one morning to the sound of Wade moving around downstairs. She descended the loft ladder. They'd kept it even after adding the second room because she liked her private space when she needed it, and found him at the table with a cup of coffee and a newspaper. "There's an article about Crane's trial," he said, sliding the paper toward her. "Jury found him guilty on all counts, 30 years in territorial prison." Charlotte read the article, feeling nothing but relief. Crane would die in prison, his empire divided among his victims, his name a byword for corruption. Justice had been slow, but it had come. "Good," she said simply. Wade pulled her into his lap, his arms warm around her waist. "So, Mrs. Blackthorn, what should we do with our first spring as legitimate homesteaders?" Charlotte looked out the window at the land they'd fought for, the life they'd built together. "I was thinking we could expand the garden, maybe get some fruit trees, and I heard the Hendersons are selling a milk cow." "You want a cow?" Wade sounded amused. "I want a future, Wade. I want to build something that lasts. Trees that will still be bearing fruit when we're old. A garden that feeds us through the winter. A life that—" She paused, her hand moving to her stomach where the first flutters of life had started making themselves known. "A life that we can pass on to someone else." Wade went very still. "Charlotte, are you saying—" "I'm saying that by next winter, we're going to need to add on to this cabin. Make room for 3 instead of 2. Wade's eyes went wide, then bright with joy. He stood, lifting her with him and spinning her around in the small cabin while she laughed. When he set her down, his hands cradled her face with infinite gentleness. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We're going to have a baby." "We are. This marriage of convenience is becoming quite complicated." "Best complication I ever signed up for." Wade kissed her softly. "I love you, Charlotte. I should have said it sooner, but I love you." "I love you too," Charlotte whispered, "even though you proposed to me with a business contract and a sunset deadline." "Hey, that proposal got you to say yes, didn't it?" Charlotte laughed, and the sound echoed through the cabin they'd built together, through the land they'd fought for, through the future they were creating one day at a time. She'd come west running from scandal and ruin, desperate for any kind of survival. She'd found something infinitely better, a partnership, a purpose, and a love that had grown in the most unlikely soil. Years later, when their daughter asked how Mama and Papa had met, Charlotte would tell her the truth. She'd tell her about a desperate woman who answered an impossible proposal, about a hard man who offered honesty instead of poetry, about a marriage that started as a contract and became a covenant. She'd tell her about standing together against threats and violence, about stealing documents from a corrupt attorney's office, about watching justice finally catch up with evil men. But most of all, she'd tell her about the moment when a business arrangement became real love, when 2 strangers who'd married out of necessity chose each other out of devotion, when a marriage of convenience transformed into the greatest fortune either of them could have imagined. The Arizona sun set over the homestead, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, and Wade Blackthorn stood on his porch with his wife in his arms and his hand resting on the small swell of her belly. The land stretched out before them, hard-won and beloved, and for the first time in his life, Wade understood that some gambles weren't really gambles at all. Some risks were just fate disguised as choice, leading you exactly where you needed to be. "You asked me for a job," Wade said, echoing words from a lifetime ago. Charlotte smiled, her eyes shining. "And you gave me everything." They stood together as twilight fell, 2 people who'd found each other against impossible odds and built a life worth living from nothing but stubbornness, courage, and love. The West was hard and unforgiving, but it rewarded those brave enough to fight for what they wanted. And Charlotte and Wade Blackthorn had fought for this, for each other, for their land, for their future, and won. The stars emerged one by one over the Arizona mountains, bearing witness to a love story that had begun with a desperate bargain and ended with everything two hearts could hold. And in the warm glow of the cabin window, against the vast darkness of the frontier night, that was more than enough. It was everything.